Greetings, fellow fans. You're tuned into Marvel Harry, presenting to you today, Fantastic Four adopted Harry at age 4 and each power merged with his magic making cosmic sorcerer. Show some love by liking and subscribing. Enjoy the story ahead. Chapter 1, The Boy on the Doorstep. The night it happened, Reed Richards was supposed to be asleep. He hadn't been, of course. Reed Richards hadn't kept a normal sleep schedule since 1997, which was the year he'd decided that 8 hours was an inefficient biological tax on a mind that genuinely never stopped working. Sue had opinions about this. Strong ones. But it was 2 in the morning on the 1st of November, 1981, and Reed was 3 floors up in the Baxter Building's main lab, surrounded by oscilloscopes and star charts and the cold blue glow of a dozen monitors, trying to explain a set of readings he'd collected just after midnight that made absolutely no sense. The energy spike had come from nowhere. Or rather, it had come from somewhere that his instruments didn't have a category for, not electromagnetic, not nuclear, not consistent with any known particle interaction. It had lasted 4 seconds, peaked at a magnitude that had briefly scrambled every sensor on the eastern seaboard, and then vanished as completely as if it had never existed. S.H.I.E.L.D. had probably noticed. NASA had definitely noticed. Reed had been the only one awake to watch it happen in real time, and he'd been trying to reconstruct the waveform ever since. He was so absorbed in the data that he almost missed the sound. Almost. It was small, a thin, wavering cry from somewhere below, muffled by 30 floors of concrete and steel but somehow still audible, which was itself strange enough to make him look up from his monitors. Reed tilted his head. The building made sounds at night. Pipes, wind off the East River, the occasional argument from the apartment 2 blocks south whose occupants had no concept of closed windows. He'd catalogued them all. This wasn't any of those. He stretched one arm toward the intercom panel without getting up from his stool, his fingers elongating effortlessly across 6 feet of lab space to tap the button. "Ben," he said. 15 seconds of silence. "Ben." A sound like a rockslide rearranging itself came through the speaker, followed by a voice like gravel being poured into a cement mixer. "It is 2 in the morning, Stretcho. I heard something outside. Near the main entrance. Then call the super. We own the building, Ben." Another pause. The sound of something massive and reluctant shifting its weight. "I hate you," Ben Grimm said, which was his standard opening position on most conversations and meant nothing whatsoever. Reed was already moving, because he hadn't actually needed Ben to come. He'd stretched himself down 2 floors by the time he finished the sentence, sliding through the stairwell gap with the particular liquid grace of a man whose skeleton was more of a suggestion than a structure. He reformed in the lobby, smoothed his shirt, and walked to the front door. The cry came again. Closer now, and undeniably real. He opened the door. The basket was sitting on the top step like it had been there forever, wicker and ordinary and deeply incongruous against the clean concrete of Manhattan's 4th Avenue. The blanket inside it was dark blue, or had been, once. Now it was singed at the edges, the fabric stiff with something that smelled faintly of ozone and old lightning. And in the middle of the blanket, red-faced and furious and wrapped in a state of considerable indignation about the temperature, was a baby. Not a newborn. Maybe a year old, give or take. Dark hair. Bright green eyes that seemed, in the orange wash of the street lamps, to be slightly too vivid to be entirely natural. And on his forehead, just above his right brow, a scar in the shape of a lightning bolt that was still faintly pink at the edges, knew enough that Reed's instinct was to check for inflammation. He crouched down slowly. The baby looked at him with the frank, assessing stare of an infant who has decided to reserve judgment. "Hello," Reed said. The baby did not answer, which was developmentally appropriate. But something very strange happened in the same moment, a warm pressure, like a hand laid gently against Reed's sternum, there and gone in an instant. He blinked. Looked down at his chest. Nothing. He said. He picked up the basket, careful and deliberate, and stepped back inside. Ben Grimm was at the bottom of the stairs when Reed turned around, 800 pounds of orange rock and loyal gruffness dressed in sweatpants and a Mets t-shirt that should not have survived contact with his frame but somehow did. He took one look at the basket. Then at Reed. Then at the basket again. "Is that a baby?" Ben said. "Yes." "Why do you have a baby?" "I found him on the step." Ben's rocky brow furrowed into the particular landscape of profound skepticism. "People don't just leave babies on the steps of the Baxter building, Reed." "No," Reed agreed. "They generally don't. And yet." He tilted the basket so Ben could see. The baby, apparently deciding that the new person was worth examining, stopped crying immediately and stared up at Ben with the green eyes and no visible fear whatsoever. Ben made a sound. It was difficult to categorize, somewhere between a grunt and something much softer. He reached out one enormous, rocky finger, moving with the absurd delicacy that he only ever used around small or breakable things, and the baby grabbed it with both hands and held on. "Strong kid," Ben said, after a moment. "Yes," Reed said, looking at the readings already forming on the handheld scanner he'd pulled from his coat pocket, because of course he had a scanner in his coat pocket. "He's also radiating an energy signature I can't immediately identify. His scar appears to be several hours old and already partially healed, and there's no note, no identification, and no obvious explanation for how he got here." He paused. "Also, that energy spike from midnight." Ben looked at him slowly. "You think this kid came through whatever made that reading?" "I think," Reed said carefully, "that the timing is worth examining." Sue found them 20 minutes later, both sitting on the lobby floor, Ben cross-legged like a small mountain range, Reed with his legs arranged in a comfortable approximation of cross-legged, the basket on the floor between them and both of them watching the baby with the concentrated attention of men who were very good at observation and had, temporarily, lost the ability to be objective about the subject. Sue Storm stood in the doorway in her bathrobe with her hair loose and her force field shimmer flickering the way it always did when she'd been startled awake. She looked at her husband and her oldest friend sitting on the floor of their building's lobby at 2:30 in the morning watching a baby, and she said, very calmly, "Where did he come from?" "The step," Ben said. "The step," she repeated. "Reed thinks he came through a dimensional rift." "Of course he does." She walked in, sat down beside Reed, and looked at the baby. The baby looked back at her. That same warm pressure, the one Reed had felt, though he hadn't mentioned it yet, pressed itself gently against her ribs, and her breath caught. "Oh," she said softly. "You felt it too?" Reed asked. "What is that?" "I don't know yet." His voice had the particular quality it got when he was genuinely, deeply fascinated by something, which was part of how Sue had fallen in love with him in the first place. "But it's consistent. Warm. Non-threatening. I think it might be how he communicates, neurologically speaking, some kind of affective projection, possibly unconscious." "He's a baby, Reed," Sue said, but she was already reaching into the basket, already picking him up with the practiced ease of someone who'd wanted this for a long time and knew exactly what to do with a small person. The baby settled against her shoulder like he'd been there before. "He's just," she stopped. Her eyes were doing the thing they did sometimes when she was trying very hard not to cry about something. "He's cold." "Where's Johnny?" "Asleep," Reed said. "Wake him up. He can warm the blanket." She was already rocking slightly, the gentle unconscious rhythm of someone holding something precious. "And then you're going to tell me everything you know, which I'm guessing is very little, and we're going to figure out what to do." "I have a preliminary theory, in the morning, Reed." He closed his mouth. Then opened it again, because he was Reed Richards. "He has a scar, morning," Sue said firmly, and carried the baby upstairs. They spent the next 3 days trying to find out where he'd come from. Reed contacted SHIELD, who had nothing. Ben called in a favor with a Department of Defense contact, who had less than nothing. Sue put in a query with every adoption agency in New York and 3 in New Jersey. Reed ran the energy signature through 12 different models and came up with a conclusion that he wrote in his notebook and then stared at for a very long time before closing the notebook without telling anyone, because the conclusion was that the child had not come from Earth 616 at all, or at least not from the branch of it they were currently standing in, and that information required considerably more verification before he was prepared to say it out loud. Johnny Storm, who was 23 and professionally uncomplicated about most things, held the baby on day 2, let him grab a finger, watched the tiny green eyes go wide with interest, and said, "We're keeping him, right?" "We don't know whose he is," Sue said. "Okay, but we're keeping him, right?" "Jonathan, Sue." Johnny looked at her with the particular earnest certainty that he almost never bothered with. "Look at him. He's got a scar on his head and he showed up in a basket outside our building after some kind of cosmic event and none of us can explain any of it. That's a Fantastic Four baby. That's our baby." Ben made a sound from the kitchen doorway that might have been agreement. "Reed," Sue said. Reed looked up from his notebook. "The energy readings are consistent with a targeting event. Whatever sent him here, it wasn't random. The Baxter building was the destination." He paused. "I think someone chose us." The room was quiet for a moment. "Well then," Sue said, "and that was that, in the way that things were often decided in the Fantastic Four, not with formal deliberation but with the specific gravity of something that was always going to happen, simply arriving at the moment it was ready. They named him Harry. Harry Richards Grimm on the paperwork, because Ben hadn't hesitated for a second when asked if he wanted to be included and had in fact gotten emotional about it in a way that he denied completely afterward. The legal process was complex. Reed called in 17 favors, Sue made 4 very pointed phone calls to people who owed her, and a SHIELD liaison named Coulson was helpful in ways that suggested he found the whole situation quietly charming. By Harry's 2nd birthday, the paperwork was complete. By his 3rd, he'd said his first full sentence, which was, "Uncle Ben," careful, delivered with complete composure when Ben accidentally knocked a support column in the lab, the column that Reed had been standing on the other end of. By the time Harry was 4, they knew they had something extraordinary. Not because of any single incident. It was accumulative, the way you didn't notice a river rising until you were standing on the bank watching it move past your knees. Reed had been cataloging it from the beginning, had in fact started a dedicated notebook on day 1 and had filled 12 more since then, but the data had a way of blurring into the ordinary texture of daily life when you were living it. Harry was Harry. He was funny and curious and physically fearless in a way that aged Sue 5 years each week, and he asked questions the way other children breathe, constant, involuntary, absolutely necessary. He was also, incidentally, doing things that no 4-year-old and frankly no adult should have been able to do. It started with the small things. Toys finding their way back to him from across rooms. Lights flickering when he was upset. The time he'd fallen off the couch, a 4-foot drop onto hardwood, enough to wind him badly, and Ben had lunged, too far away, already knowing he couldn't catch him in time, and then Harry had simply stopped in midair. Hung there for 2 full seconds. Then drifted down like a leaf. And looked up at Ben with green eyes that were absolutely calm and said, "Oops," in a tone that suggested he found this mildly interesting. Ben had sat down on the floor immediately, because his knees required it. Then there was the fire incident. Harry was 4.5, and Johnny had been showing him, against Sue's expressed wishes, a controlled flame juggling trick, because Johnny Storm's primary love language was demonstrating cool things. Harry had watched with his chin in his hands and his eyes very bright, and then he'd reached out and touched one of the flame balls while it was still burning. Sue had been halfway across the room. The sound she made was not a word. Harry pulled his hand back. He held it up. He looked at his completely unburned palm with an expression of intense scientific curiosity, which was Reed's expression, which meant 4 years of proximity had already done its work, and then he looked at Johnny. "Again," he said. Johnny looked at Sue. Sue looked at Harry's hand. Reed, who had appeared from nowhere with a handheld scanner, was already making notes. "Reed," Sue said. It's all right, Reed said, which was either the most irresponsible or most informed thing he could have said, and was probably both. He's not hurt. In fact, Sue, his base temperature is running about 6 degrees above normal. It's been trending upward since the fall incident. He made another note. I think it's stabilizing. Why, Sue said carefully, is our 4-year-old's body temperature 6 degrees above normal? That's the interesting part, Reed said. The interesting part, as Reed explained it over the next several months, carefully, to Sue, because Sue was the family's primary emotional regulator and needed information before she could be calm, and because explaining things was Reed's most basic comfort mechanism, was that Harry's magic appeared to be adaptive in a way that was almost biological in its methodology. It wasn't absorbing their powers. It was more like, Reed struggled with analogies here, which was unusual, like a language. Harry's magic was the syntax, and their abilities were vocabulary it was incorporating, running the new words through its own grammar and producing something that was both recognizable and entirely new. Sue's force fields were the clearest example. Harry had, by the time he was 5, begun instinctively generating invisible barriers. Not Sue's flat planes of solid force, Harry's were three-dimensional, curved, and extraordinarily responsive, tightening when something fast came toward him and loosening when he wanted them to breathe. The first time something had been thrown at him by accident, a rubber ball, launched from Johnny's direction, aimed at the television, Harry had been looking the other way. The ball had bounced off something invisible 18 inches from the back of his head and ricocheted into the opposite wall. Harry had turned around, looked at the ball, looked at Johnny, and looked back at the ball. "Did you mean to do that?" he asked. "Did I?" Johnny pointed. "Did you?" Harry considered. "Not exactly," he said, which at 5 years old was a remarkably precise answer. Reed's influence showed differently. It wasn't physical the way fire resistance was physical. It was cognitive, or perhaps metamagical. Harry's approach to magic was fluid in a way that even Reed, who understood flexibility better than anyone, found remarkable. He didn't have to repeat a specific gesture or intonation to achieve an effect twice. He'd do something once, understand it intuitively on the first try, and the second attempt would be refined, adapted, stretched to suit slightly different conditions. It was the same cognitive agility that made Reed's power useful, the ability to be a different shape for each different situation. Ben's contribution was quieter and, in some ways, the most profound. Harry had spent more hours with Ben than with anyone except Sue. Ben was the one who picked him up from things when Reed was absorbed in work and Sue was on a mission and Johnny was being Johnny. Ben was the one who sat with him through thunderstorms and nightmares and the specific 3 a.m. sadness that sometimes arrived without reason. And somewhere in all of that, Ben's extraordinary physical durability had woven itself into Harry's body at a level that went deeper than temperature regulation. At 6, Harry had taken a full-speed accidental collision with Ben in the hallway. Ben had been moving fast, momentum he couldn't fully arrest, and Harry had gone down like he'd been hit by a wall, which was exactly what had happened. Reed had been on scene in seconds with the scanner. Harry had bounced back up in under 30 seconds, shaken but uninjured, and Ben had gone gray under his rocky complexion and sat down and said, "I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry," in a voice Reed had never heard him use before, and Harry had climbed into his enormous lap and pressed his face against Ben's chest and said, "It's okay, Uncle Ben. I'm okay." "You shouldn't be," Ben said. "But I am," Harry said, with simple certainty. "I'm always okay when I'm with you." Reed had looked at the scanner readings for a long time after that. By the time Harry was 7, they'd stopped keeping his abilities strictly a secret within the Baxter building. He'd been introduced to what they could explain: "Your magic is doing something interesting with our energy signatures," in terms that a 7-year-old with Reed Richards as a father could handle, which was to say, fairly technically and with visual aids. Harry had listened to the whole explanation, asked 3 extremely sharp questions, and then said, "So basically I'm like all of you, but also more me." Yes, Reed said, which was simultaneously the simplest and most accurate summary he'd heard. "Neat," Harry said, and went back to reading. He was reading at a 12th grade level by age 8, which Reed had tested and then quietly retested because the first result had seemed statistically improbable. He'd devoured everything in the Baxter Building's extensive library, had worked through 3 of Reed's introductory physics textbooks, and had developed opinions, specific, well-reasoned, confidently delivered opinions, about quantum mechanics and whether it was relevant to what he could do with fire. He was also, Sue made sure of this, a child. He played games. He argued with Johnny about everything from music to the proper technique for eating a burger. He played catch with Ben in the building's underground garage, where ceilings were high enough that Ben's throws wouldn't become structural problems, and he laughed the full, whole-body laugh of a kid who was exactly where he was supposed to be. He never asked about his biological parents. Or rather, he asked once, at age 6, with the direct curiosity that was his primary mode of inquiry, and Reed and Sue had sat him down and told him the truth as they understood it, that he'd arrived at their door, that they didn't know who'd sent him or why, and that they'd chosen to keep him the same night they found him. Harry had listened with his chin in his hands, processing, and then said, "Do you think they knew you'd be good at it? Taking care of me?" Sue had found several things suddenly requiring her immediate attention elsewhere. Reed had said, very carefully, "I think whoever sent you made a very considered decision." Harry had nodded, satisfied, and that had been the end of that conversation. He'd filed it in whatever internal drawer he kept questions he didn't need to resolve yet, and he'd gotten on with being 8 years old. What Reed didn't tell him, what Reed had quietly sat with for 7 years, turning it over in the private part of his mind that he shared with no one, not even Sue, was what he'd eventually concluded about the night Harry had arrived. The energy signature. The dimensional tear. The targeting algorithm, because that was what it was, the readings made that unmistakably clear. Something on the other end of that rift had not simply ejected Harry at random but had aimed him, specifically and precisely, at the Baxter Building. At them. Someone had known. Someone, somewhere, in whatever version of the world Harry had come from, had understood exactly who the Fantastic Four were and what they could give him. Reed found that simultaneously the most comforting and most haunting thought he'd ever had. The other thing Reed didn't mention to Harry, because it required more data, was the matter of the cosmic awareness. It had started showing up in the notebooks around Harry's 6th year, small observations, logged carefully, never discussed. The time Harry had looked up from his book 10 seconds before the phone rang with emergency news about a mission. The time he'd turned to the door 10 full seconds before Ben knocked. The time, and this was the one that had kept Reed awake longest, Harry had looked at the sky from the Baxter Building's roof and said, with no context and no obvious trigger, "Something happened to someone I was supposed to know. Far away. I can feel where it was, like a hole." Reed had stood next to him for a long moment. "Can you feel what happened?" "No," Harry said. He didn't seem upset, more thoughtful, the way he got when he was trying to understand something new. "Just that it was big. And that it was a long time ago." He'd looked at Reed. "Does that make sense?" "More than you might think," Reed had said quietly. Harry's 8th year was also the year of the first real incident. He'd been at the YMCA with Johnny. Johnny took him to the gym twice a week, because Ben had suggested it and Johnny would do almost anything Ben suggested while pretending otherwise, and they'd been in the pool area when 3 older boys, teenagers, had decided that dunking an 8-year-old's head underwater was an amusing way to spend an afternoon. Johnny had been talking to someone at the opposite end of the pool deck and hadn't seen it start. Harry had let the first one happen. He was curious, genuinely, about what people thought they could do, and in the 2 seconds his head was underwater he'd calmly assessed the situation and arrived at a conclusion. The second time the boy had grabbed for him, Harry had shifted his weight in a way that was technically a defensive judo pivot that Ben had taught him, except that he'd applied it with the smooth, adapted precision of someone who had been unconsciously flexible in his body for his whole life. The teenager had ended up face first in the pool. Not dangerously, not in a way that risked injury, but comprehensively, and with a splash that attracted attention from across the facility. The other 2 boys had stared. Harry had looked at them with the calm, level attention of a person who was not remotely frightened. There was something in the green eyes, not a threat, exactly. More like a clear, factual assessment that he was communicating without speaking. I know what I am, and you don't, and I am not the target you thought you found. One of the boys had backed up. Then both of them. The first one came up sputtering. Johnny, who had arrived at pace, had looked at the soaked teenager, then at Harry, then at the two boys already leaving. What happened? Johnny asked. They tried to dunk me, Harry said. And I let the first one happen to get information, and then I applied what Ben taught me about leverage. Johnny looked at the teenager, who was pulling himself out of the pool with the specific dignity of someone who would not be acknowledging this incident. Huh, Johnny said. He's fine, Harry said. I checked. I know you did. Johnny had looked at him for a moment with something that wasn't quite the usual easy grin. Something more complicated. Something that had been quietly growing since the first time he'd held Harry at 2 days old. Come on. We're getting pizza. You say that like it's a reward, Harry said. It is a reward. For what? I didn't do anything impressive. Johnny had put a hand on his shoulder and turned him toward the exit. For being 8 and already being smarter than me. That's an achievement. I'm acknowledging it. Harry laughed, and Johnny grinned, and neither of them mentioned the fact that the water in the pool had been, briefly, noticeably warmer in the immediate vicinity of Harry's position. By 9, the magical incidents were no longer small. The Baxter Building's lab had been recording ambient magical energy readings in the double digits for over a year. Reed had been quietly thrilled by this and had upgraded 3 pieces of monitoring equipment to handle the new range. Sue had been directing her attention to making sure Harry knew how to manage what he was feeling, because she'd understood from the beginning, before any of the readings confirmed it, that Harry's magic was rooted in emotion in a way that was fundamentally different from anything scientific. It didn't run on electricity or radiation. It ran on him. On what he felt, what he intended, who he loved. She'd talked to him about it directly, the way she talked to him about everything, at the kitchen table, over food, in the language of people who knew each other well enough to say hard things simply. When you feel it come up, she said, what does it feel like? Harry turned his mug in both hands. He was 9, sharp-featured already, with Reed's habitual considering something expression sitting on Ben's fundamental solidity. Like warmth, he said. In my chest. Like when you care about something and it fills up. And when you're angry? Hotter. A pause. I'm careful with the hot. You are, Sue said, and meant it absolutely. I've noticed. Because of Ben, Harry said, which was true and not the whole truth. Because of Ben meaning, because of what it costs a person to have enormous power and to know that using it without care causes harm. Ben had never needed to say that in explicit terms. He'd demonstrated it, every day, in the precise gentleness he applied to a world that was built for smaller people. Is it ever scary? Sue asked. Harry considered this with the seriousness he applied to all her genuine questions. No, he said finally. Not scary. Sometimes big. Like standing at the edge of something that goes a long way down. But not scary. That's an important difference, she said. Yeah. He looked at her, direct and clear. Sue. I know what I am. I'm not, I don't feel lost about it. She'd heard that, really heard it, and something she'd been quietly carrying since the night they'd found him had set itself down. The letters started coming in September of Harry's 10th year. Not the Hogwarts letters, those came the following year. These were stranger, coded messages through channels that shouldn't have existed, delivered by a large gray owl that appeared on the Baxter Building's roof with the specific air of an owl that was above questions. Reed had intercepted the first one, an inquiry, brief and precise, from a British governmental body that did not officially exist, asking whether a Harry Richards Grimm of the Baxter Building was known to them and whether his unusual abilities had manifested. Reed had sent back a reply that said, essentially, yes, he is known to us, and who exactly are you? The reply to that had been considerably longer, and had introduced the concept of the British wizarding community, Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, and a man named Albus Dumbledore. Reed had sat very still for a time. Then he'd opened his notebook to a clean page. He didn't tell Harry immediately. He told Sue first, the way he handled most things, because Sue was his primary thinking partner and because she had the ability to assess emotional stakes in ways he sometimes missed. Sue had read the letter twice and then said, "He's been looking for Harry for 10 years. That appears to be the case. This Dumbledore." "Yes. He wanted Harry to grow up somewhere specific. The letters suggest, a family, in Surrey, the Dursleys," Reed said. I cross-referenced. Sue looked at the letter again. "Reed. I know. Harry was supposed to go to people who," she stopped. "Set the letter down. He ended up here instead." "Yes. Because of the rift. Whatever sent him here." "Yes." The silence between them had a particular texture, two highly intelligent people doing the same moral calculation and arriving at the same answer simultaneously. Whatever Dumbledore had planned, whatever role Harry was supposed to have played in whatever situation had created that scar and that night and that terrible dimensional tear, Harry had come here instead. Harry had grown up with them. Harry was 10 years old and secure in himself and capable of things that hadn't existed before him, and the version of Harry that would have grown up in a cupboard under the stairs was a person who had never existed. Reed would spend the rest of his life quietly grateful for that. They told Harry on his 11th birthday, which was the 1st of August. Reed had prepared a presentation, because of course he had, not a long one, not an information dump, but a considered framework. The gist: there was a hidden world of magic users in Britain. Harry was apparently famous in this world for surviving something as a baby that no one else had survived. There was a school. The school sent letters to magical children. His letter had not arrived yet, but Reed estimated it would within the week. Harry had listened. He'd drunk his birthday tea and he'd listened with the focused, tracking attention he'd had since he was 3 years old. "Famous for surviving," he said, when Reed finished. "Yes. They think the scar is from that. That's the prevailing theory in their community, yes." Harry touched his forehead, briefly. He did this sometimes, not self-consciously, more the way you touch a familiar scar you'd had all your life. "What do they call me in this world?" "The boy who lived," Sue said. Something moved across Harry's face, complicated, quick, and then settled. "That's a strange thing to call someone." "Yes," Ben said, from the kitchen doorway. He'd been there since the beginning, leaning against the frame with his arms crossed and his rocky face arranged in the careful neutral he used when he was listening hard. "Seems like they made a story out of you before you had a say." "They do that with all of us," Johnny said, which was true. Harry had looked at his family one at a time, Reed, Sue, Johnny, Ben, and then he looked at his hands, which were resting flat on the table, and he took a slow breath. "Okay," he said. "So there's a school." "Yes," Reed said. "And I'll learn magic there." "You already know magic." "Considerably more than they'll teach in year 1, based on what I can infer from the curriculum." The corner of Harry's mouth twitched. "But I'll go." "We thought you might want to," Sue said. "It's your choice, completely." He looked at her. "Of course I want to go," he said, with the simple, warm certainty of a person who had never been afraid of new things. "I want to see what it is. I want to know where this came from." He touched the scar again. "And I want to understand what I survived." "We'll come for visits," Ben said immediately. "Uncle Ben, I'll be home for Christmas." "I know that. I'm saying we'll also come for visits." Johnny pointed. "He's already planning on visiting like twice a month, don't let the gruff thing fool you." Ben turned. "You want to go through a wall, Matchstick? I want to see you try." Harry laughed, the full-body laugh, the one that meant everything was exactly right, and the lights in the kitchen flickered warm and bright for just a second, the way they always did when Harry was genuinely happy. The Hogwarts letter arrived 4 days later. It came via an extraordinarily large and self-important owl that landed on the kitchen counter and presented the envelope with the air of something performing a sacred duty. Harry took it from the owl's leg with both hands and turned it over. Thick parchment. A red seal with a crest. Mr. H. Richards Grimm, 4th floor east, the Baxter Building, New York City. And in the corner, something that wasn't on any other Hogwarts letter sent that year, though Harry wouldn't know this until later, a secondary note, in smaller writing, folded inside the first one. A personal note from Albus Dumbledore himself, requesting a meeting. Expressing that he was aware of Harry's extraordinary development. Using words like impressed and concerned in a careful ratio that said a great deal about the man who'd written them. Harry read the note. He set it aside on the counter. He read the actual letter, which listed his supply requirements: robes, cauldron, wand, books, and at the bottom, in neat print, September 1st, Platform 9 3/4, King's Cross Station, London. Platform 9 3/4, he said. There's a whole thing with a wall apparently, Johnny said, reading over his shoulder. I'll figure it out. Obviously you'll figure it out. I'm just saying, they put the school entrance behind a wall and acted like that's normal. You enter the Baxter Building through a biometric security system and a 30-floor elevator ride, Harry pointed out. That's different. That's practical. So's a magic wall. Harry folded the letter and looked at the sealed envelope it had come in. He turned it over in his hands once more, feeling the weight of it, the particular gravity of something that is both an invitation and a door. I need a wand, he said. And robes, Reed said. And books, Sue said. And a cauldron, Ben said. I'll need to go to London, Harry said. To this Diagon Alley place. We'll go together, Reed said immediately. Reed, I want to see the wand shop. He didn't even have the grace to look apologetic about it. Also, Gringotts Bank is described as being staffed by goblins, and I have approximately 87 questions about goblin physiology and whether it relates to any known primate deviation. 87 seems low, Harry said. I haven't started the full list yet. Reed produced a small notebook from his coat pocket, a new one, fresh pages. I'll have it ready by morning. That night, Harry sat on the roof of the Baxter Building the way he often did when he was thinking something through. The city spread out below him in its orange and gold nighttime sprawl, the East River a dark ribbon, the sky above lit up by enough ambient light to wash most of the stars away. He sat with his knees pulled up and his arms resting on them, and he felt the low, steady warmth of his magic in his chest, not doing anything, just being, the way it always was, like a pilot light that never went out. He thought about the letter. He thought about the wizarding world and what it knew about him and what it expected, the boy who lived, the survivor, the symbol. He thought about Dumbledore's note and the careful arithmetic of its language. He thought about the scar on his forehead and the hole in the universe that had sent him here, and the family inside the building below him who had received that impossible delivery and kept it. He didn't feel like a symbol. He didn't feel like a survivor in the way stories meant that word, fragile, haunted, defined by what had hurt him. He felt like Harry. He felt like the kid who'd grown up with the most extraordinary people in New York, who'd learned fire and force fields and the right way to throw a punch and the wrong way to enter a room quietly from people who loved him. He felt like the sum of everything that had happened since the basket on the step. He pressed his hand flat against the roof, and without particular intent, the concrete warmed slightly under his palm. Figured I'd find you up here, Ben said, from the rooftop door. Harry didn't turn around. Figured you'd come find me. The massive weight of Ben settling down beside him was a physical reassurance, the same reassurance it had been since Harry was 3 years old and having a nightmare, and the only thing that made the dark manageable was the solidity of Uncle Ben in the room. Ben didn't say anything for a while. The city moved below them. A siren somewhere in the 20s. The wind off the river cold and clean. You nervous? Ben asked finally. No, Harry said, truthfully. Good, Ben said. Are you nervous? A long pause. Little bit, Ben admitted. Not for you. You're gonna be fine. He stopped. Started again. I got used to you being where I can see you. Harry looked at him. In the city light, Ben's rocky face was all shadow and warm edge, and his expression was the one he only had at moments like this, stripped of the deflection, just the thing underneath, which was enormous and constant and had nothing to do with size. All right, Harry said. You better. Every week. Every week, Ben confirmed, and his voice had the rough quality of someone managing something carefully. Harry leaned against him, the way he'd always done, using the massive rock-solid warmth of him as a wall between himself and whatever was cold. Ben's arm came around him, careful as always, precise in its gentleness. Hey Ben. Harry said. Yeah, kid. I know who I am, Harry said. I'm not going to forget it when I get there. Ben was quiet for a moment. Then, I know. I just wanted you to know that I know. I heard you the first time. But he held him a little tighter, and neither of them moved for a long time. Below them, the city was indifferent and bright. Above them, the stars that the light pollution couldn't entirely erase were doing their small, ancient work. And Harry Richards-Grimm sat on the roof of his home with his uncle's arm around him and thought about the road opening up ahead and felt nothing but ready. Chapter 2, Diagon Alley and the Shape of Magic. The portkey Dumbledore arranged dropped them in a narrow alley behind a London pub at 7 in the morning, which Reed found logistically inconsiderate and Harry found immediately interesting. There's magic in the bricks, Harry said, the moment his feet hit the cobblestones. He wasn't looking at anything specific, his eyes had the slightly unfocused quality they got when the cosmic awareness was doing something. He turned slowly, a quarter rotation, and pressed one hand flat against the pub's exterior wall. Old. Really old. Like the building grew up around it instead of being built on top of it. Reed already had the scanner out. The ambient readings here are, he stopped. Looked at the display. Looked at Harry. Considerably higher than New York. Because everything here is magic, Harry said, with the satisfaction of someone whose hypothesis has been confirmed. He let go of the wall and straightened up. Concentrated. Like a watershed. Reed was already writing in the notebook. Harry gently took his father's elbow and steered him away from the middle of the alley before a woman in purple robes walked through where he was standing. She gave Harry a startled look. He gave her a polite nod. She moved on, looking slightly unsettled, which Harry was beginning to understand might be a common reaction to him here. The entrance to the leaky cauldron was easy enough to find once you were looking for it. Reed paused at the threshold with the specific expression he had around things that intrigued him profoundly, eyebrows slightly up, head tilted, absorbing. Harry went first. The pub was dim and warm and smelled of wood smoke and something herbal Harry couldn't immediately name. About a dozen people scattered at tables, and every single one of them looked up when Harry walked in. Not a casual glance. A full, arrested look, the kind people gave things they'd been looking for without quite admitting it. Harry looked back, open and easy, and nobody seemed to know what to do with that. The barman, a toothless, cheerful man who introduced himself as Tom without being asked, went very still when his eyes landed on Harry's forehead. "Blimey," he said softly. "Is that, Harry Richards-Grimm?" Harry said, extending a hand across the bar. "This is my father, Reed Richards." Tom shook the hand with the bewildered air of a man whose morning had pivoted unexpectedly. Around them, the pub had gone from quiet to quieter in the way that meant everyone was pretending very hard not to listen. "Welcome," Tom managed. "Welcome to, we're very glad to," he seemed to run out of sentence. "Thank you," Harry said, warmly and simply, and the tension in the room dropped by about 40%. Reed leaned close to Harry as they moved toward the back entrance. "They recognize you." "Obviously," Harry said, not unkindly. The scar. The scar. Harry's voice was matter of fact. Doesn't bother me. Let's find Gringotts first. The book said it handles wizarding inheritance, which means they probably have something on file about whatever I am to this world. Reed's notebook was already open. I have 23 questions for the goblins. You told me 87 last night. I narrowed it down to the most structurally important. Still seems like a lot to open with, Harry said. The brick wall in the courtyard responded to Harry before Reed could tap the sequence. 3 bricks shifted of their own accord, then the rest followed in a ripple that went faster than the guide pamphlet Dumbledore's office had sent them had suggested. Reed watched it with enormous attention. Harry stepped through the archway first. Diagon Alley unfolded in front of them and Harry stopped walking for 3 full seconds. It wasn't the buildings, though they were extraordinary, crooked and tall and leaning into each other like old friends with no concept of right angles. It wasn't the people, though they were remarkable, robes in every color, owls in cages, a child carrying a cauldron twice her size with no evident difficulty. It was the magic itself. Harry could feel it everywhere, in everything, running through the alley like warm water. Like coming into a room where a language you'd always spoken in isolation was suddenly being spoken all around you. Oh, he said. Just that. Reed looked at him. You all right? It's like coming home, Harry said, and his voice had something in it that surprised even him, not nostalgia, because he had no memories of this world. Something else. Recognition. He took a breath and moved. Gringotts stood at the far end of the alley like it was daring you to approach it, white marble and imposing and guarded by 2 goblins in scarlet and gold uniforms who watched Harry and Reed ascend the steps with the particular alertness of sentinels who had been briefed. Harry noticed this. He was fairly certain the goblins noticed him noticing. Inside, the hall was everything the guidebook had undersold, enormous, high-ceilinged, 100 goblins working at their counters with the focused energy of professionals who had been doing this work for centuries and had not once been impressed by anything. Harry walked to the nearest available counter and waited. The goblin assigned to them was named Ragnarok, according to the small brass plate. He was older than the others, his face a map of fine lines, his eyes the sharp gold of something that had been appraising value for a very long time. He looked at Harry the way the leaky cauldron patrons had looked at him, but differently. Not with awe or unease. With the calculating attention of someone conducting an assessment. Mr. Potter, Ragnarok said. Harry didn't correct him. He filed the name away, interesting, and said, I'm here about the Potter vaults, if they exist, and also to exchange some currency. He slid Reed's prepared card across the counter, which listed the account numbers for the Richards Estates International Holdings. Reed Richards. My father. Ragnarok looked at the card. Looked at Reed. Looked at Harry. His nostrils flared slightly, which Harry interpreted, correctly, as a magical sensitivity being triggered. You are not solely what you appear to be, Ragnarok said, which was not a question. No, Harry agreed pleasantly. Your magical signature is, Ragnarok stopped. Set down the card. Folded his long-fingered hands on the counter in a way that suggested he was reorganizing his understanding of the meeting. Complex, he finished, which was clearly not the word he'd started toward. I grew up somewhere without other magical people, Harry said. My magic adapted. Adapted. Ragnarok repeated the word with the care of someone handling something unfamiliar. The Potter vaults are held in trust pending your confirmation of identity. A blood seal will be required. He produced a small gold dish without looking away from Harry. Harry pressed his thumb to the dish. The surface glowed, first gold, then a deep, vibrating blue that neither the dish nor the room appeared to have been designed to produce. 3 other goblins at nearby counters looked up immediately. Ragnarok stared at the blue light for a long moment. Confirmed, he said, in a voice that had shed about 30% of its professional blankness. Harry James Potter, heir of the ancient and noble houses of Potter and Black, and, he paused again. Something else is in this seal that I do not have a category for. Story of my life, Harry said. Reed Richards, Reed said helpfully, producing a business card. I've been conducting longitudinal readings of Harry's magical signature for approximately 8 years. I'd be very interested in comparing my data with any historical records Gringotts maintains on signature types of this complexity, if that's something you'd be open to discussing. Ragnarok looked at the business card. He looked at Reed with the expression of a being who has met a great many unusual humans in a very long career and has just encountered one of the more interesting ones. We do not typically share institutional records with non-magical persons. Technically I'm not non-magical, Reed said. I've been altered at a molecular level by cosmic radiation. Whether that constitutes magic is an open definitional question that I think we both find productive to explore. A pause. Ragnarok's expression did not change, but his eyes moved to Harry as if asking a question. He's always like this, Harry said. It's genuine. He really does want to know. Said Ragnarok, and it was the most evaluative sound Harry had ever heard a single syllable carry. He stamped 3 documents in rapid succession. The Potter and Black vaults will be made available to you immediately. The combined holdings are, he named a number. Reed wrote it down without visible reaction because he was accustomed to large numbers. Harry's eyebrows moved briefly upward. That's a lot, Harry said. Your family was old and careful, Ragnarok said. There was something in his voice, not warmth, exactly, but a kind of professional respect. The Potter line has not drawn on the vaults for a decade. And the Black holdings were redirected here upon the death of the last account manager. He looked at Harry directly, and for the first time there was something unmistakably personal in it. Your parents would be pleased. Harry held the goblin's gaze. Thank you, he said, and meant it in a way that Ragnarok apparently heard, because the old goblin inclined his head, a small movement, formal, significant. The vault cart ride was spectacular and Reed almost fell out twice because he kept trying to observe the tunnel geology while they were moving. Harry held his collar twice without comment. The Potter vault, when it opened, was everything a vault belonging to an ancient magical family should be, gold and heirlooms and the musty clean smell of preserved things, and one item sitting on a velvet stand at the center that made Harry's magic flare immediately, a sharp bright pulse in his chest. A folded cloak, silver gray, with a quality to its surface that was not quite the right way visible. Harry approached it slowly. He didn't need to touch it to know what it was, the cosmic awareness brought him something not quite a memory, more a shape. A sense of something meant. What is that? Reed asked. An invisibility cloak, Harry said. Not a regular one. He turned to Ragnarok, who had accompanied them personally, which Harry suspected was unusual. This is one of the Deathly Hallows. The silence in the vault was profound. Where did you learn that name? Ragnarok asked, quietly. I don't know, Harry said honestly. He looked at the cloak. But it's mine, isn't it? It was your father's, Ragnarok said. And his father's. And back beyond memory. Harry picked it up. The magic in it met his and something happened, not dramatic, not visible, just a deep, resonant recognition, like 2 instruments finding the same note. He folded it carefully and put it in the inner pocket of his jacket, where it fit perfectly in a way that a folded garment its size shouldn't have been able to. Reed noted this and wrote it down. Back on the surface, the day had warmed and the alley was properly busy now. Harry had a list, robes first, then books, then the wand last, per Reed's strategic thinking. Reed's reasoning was that a wand fitting required a baseline reading of Harry's magical output, and a morning of exposure to the alley's ambient magic would have established a clearer equilibrium. Harry had not questioned this because Reed was almost always right about process and because he wasn't in a hurry. Madame Malkin's fitting went smoothly until it didn't. The seamstress was professional and quick, and Harry stood on the fitting block while she worked and watched the shop with the easy attention of someone cataloging a new place. There was another student in the shop, a boy with sharp pale features and the well-dressed bearing of someone raised knowing exactly how much things cost. He looked at Harry once, and his eyes caught on the scar the way everyone's did, and then he said, in the tone of someone accustomed to leading conversations, "Hogwarts." "Yes," Harry said. "What house do you think you'll be in?" "I don't know yet. Whichever one fits." The pale boy considered this with the slight puzzlement of someone who had expected a different answer. "I'm Malfoy. Draco Malfoy. Harry Richards Grimm." He offered his hand across the space between their fitting blocks. Malfoy shook it with a slight hesitation that said the name meant nothing to him, which was interesting. He hadn't seen the scar clearly yet, Harry realized. Madame Malkin's measuring tape was working around Harry's forehead. "Richards Grimm," Malfoy repeated. "That's not a wizarding family name." "No," Harry agreed. "My family's from New York." "Americans," Malfoy said, in the tone of someone filing something under unexpected. "Are there many?" Harry asked, with genuine curiosity. "A few. They usually go to Ilvermorny." Malfoy studied him with the appraising look of someone who had been taught to sort people quickly. "Your parents must have had a reason for sending you here specifically." "My parents died when I was a baby," Harry said, easy and matter-of-fact. "The family that raised me thought Hogwarts would be the right fit." "I'm sorry," Malfoy said, and it seemed to be genuine, which Harry noted with interest. The measuring tape finished and moved aside, and Malfoy got his first clear look at Harry's forehead. The change in his expression was immediate, a rapid recalibration, a dawning recognition, followed by something more complicated than Harry usually got from people seeing the scar. Not awe. Almost something like unease. "You're him," Malfoy said. "I'm Harry, yes," Harry said pleasantly. "Harry Potter. Richards Grimm, legally. But yes, I was born Potter." He looked at Malfoy with the open, direct steadiness he'd inherited from years of Ben's example. "Does that change something?" Malfoy was quiet for a second, which told Harry more than talking would have. "My father," he stopped. Restarted. "You're a legend. In our world." "I know," Harry said. "I found out about 3 weeks ago." "You didn't know?" Genuine surprise. "I didn't grow up in your world." He watched Malfoy processing this. "I'm looking forward to learning it. All of it. Not just the legend parts." Malfoy was quiet for another moment, and when he spoke again the aristocratic tone had shifted slightly, not dropped, but adjusted, the way someone adjusts when they realize the room is different than they thought. "Well," he said carefully. "I could tell you some things. About the families, the politics. It's complicated." "I like complicated," Harry said. They finished their fittings in a conversation that was not quite a friendship but was, Harry thought, the beginning of something honest. Malfoy was sharp and knowledgeable and had opinions about everything, some of which were clearly inherited rather than developed, and Harry listened to all of them with the impartial attention he gave to new information. By the time Harry stepped down from the fitting block, Malfoy seemed slightly off balance in the way that suggested he'd expected this meeting to go differently. "I'll see you at Hogwarts," Harry said. "Yes," Malfoy said, and watched him go with an expression that was doing a lot of work. Reed was waiting outside, notebook in hand, with the expression of someone who has been happily observing things. "Good conversation." "Informative," Harry said. "He's from an important family. Old money. His father has or had Voldemort connections." Reed absorbed this without alarm. "How do you know the last part?" He started to say, "my father," and then stopped when he realized who he was talking to. Harry glanced back at the shop window. "He's been told things. I want to understand what." "You want allies," Reed said. "I want information. Allies come after." He looked ahead down the alley. "Books next." Flourish and blots was exactly what Harry had hoped for and Reed found overwhelming in the best possible way. they had to establish a working protocol within the first 2 minutes, which was, Reed could pause to read anything he wanted as long as he held Harry's elbow to maintain physical continuity so they didn't lose each other in the stacks. It was an undignified system and it worked perfectly. Harry found his required textbooks in 10 minutes. He spent the next 40 in sections that weren't on the list. The advanced magical theory section was in the back, and Harry worked through it with the focused silence of someone pulling threads. He had a particular way of reading, not linearly, but relationally, finding the connections between ideas across pages rather than down them. Reed had noticed this at age 6 and had adapted his teaching accordingly, and it had paid off in a child who built knowledge structures rather than knowledge lists. He was 3 books into the theory section when someone else reached for the same shelf from the other side and they both stopped with their hands near the same spine, a thick red volume called The Architecture of Intent, a foundational theory of spell construction. On the other side of the shelf was a girl about Harry's age, brown bushy hair, bright dark eyes, and the expression of someone who had also been in this section for a while and had also not been here for the required texts. She looked at the book. She looked at Harry. She said, "I've been reading the summary on the back for 10 minutes trying to decide if it's worth the price." "It is," Harry said, moving his hand. "Take it. I've already read the underlying theory from a different angle." "What angle?" she asked, immediately. He liked her immediately for that. "Empirical. My father's a scientist. But you're a wizard." Her brow furrowed. "Or, magical." "You are magical." "Very," Harry said. "I'm Harry." "Hermione Granger," she said, and shook his hand with the firmness of someone who'd been told a good handshake mattered and had taken it seriously. "First year at Hogwarts?" "Yes." "You?" "Yes." She pulled the red book from the shelf. "I'm Muggle-born. My parents are dentists. I've been reading everything I can find since I got my letter, but it's all either very basic or very advanced with nothing in the middle, and the theory is, there are so many gaps. Things they say work but don't explain why they work." "The why is the interesting part," Harry said. "Exactly." She looked at him with the evaluating attention of someone deciding something. "Have you read Spellman's syllabary? Read it and cross-referenced it with 3 texts on phonological theory. The tonal structure maps onto some interesting." He stopped, because he was about to go 3 degrees deep on a theory he'd spent 2 weeks developing and she'd just met him. "Sorry. I do that." "No, keep going," she said, with complete sincerity. He kept going. Reed found them 15 minutes later standing in the aisle with 3 books between them, mid-conversation, and assessed the situation immediately. He extended his hand to Hermione and said, "Reed Richards. Harry's father." His eyes moved to the books she was holding and the one Harry had open. "You're discussing the tonal theory. Excellent. Harry, did you bring up the resonance overlap issue?" "I was getting there," Harry said. "Resonance overlap?" Hermione asked. They were in the shop for another 20 minutes. They walked out together, all 3 of them, and Hermione's parents, a pleasant couple who handled meeting Reed Richards with admirable composure, joined them on the pavement. Hermione wrote her address in Harry's notebook and Harry gave her the Baxter Buildings and they made a vague agreement to write before September that Harry was already certain Hermione would follow up on within the week. It was while Hermione's father was talking to Reed about something and Hermione was reorganizing her book bag that Harry heard it, a sharp sound from the alley between Flourish and Blots and the apothecary next door, and a voice that was trying to be quiet about being cruel. He moved without deciding to. The alley was narrow and shadowed. 3 boys, maybe 13 or 14, and a smaller girl backed against the wall with her bag in front of her like a shield, her face very controlled in the way that meant she'd had to learn to control it. One of the boys had her wand in his hand, turning it like he was inspecting something he'd picked up off the ground. "Give that back," the girl said, quiet and even. "Muggleborns shouldn't carry wands in the open," the boy said. He had the specific tone of someone reciting something they'd been told rather than something they'd concluded. "It's embarrassing." Harry walked into the alley and stopped. He didn't say anything immediately. He just stood there, in the mouth of the alley, and waited until all three boys noticed him. They did. And then, because of the scar, or because of something else, something in the way he was standing, they went a little still. "The wand," Harry said pleasantly. "Give it back." The boy with the wand straightened up. He was taller than Harry, broader, and he had the animal instinct of a bully recognizing a new variable and not yet sure how to file it. "Who are you?" "Someone who'd like the wand returned," Harry said. "I think," the boy said, "you should go back to wherever you came from and mind your—" Harry's hand came up, not toward the boy but toward the wand. It left the boy's fingers and crossed the 8 feet between them smoothly and without haste, as if gravity had simply reoriented its preferences, and settled in Harry's palm. He looked at it briefly. Good wand, well made. He could feel the cedar and the tight-coiled energy of it, and held it out toward the girl without looking away from the three boys. "Here," he said. She took it. Her fingers were steady. The boy who'd been holding the wand was staring at Harry's hand. You did Accio without saying." "I didn't do Accio," Harry said, mildly. "I just asked for it." He let that sentence sit for a moment, because sometimes the truth was its own argument. The three boys looked at each other. Then they left, with the specific speed of people who are not running but are moving with considerable purpose, and the alley became quiet. Harry turned to the girl. She was about his age, dark-haired, with ink stains on her fingers and an assessing look in her eyes that reminded him a little of Hermione. "You all right?" "Fine," she said. "Then, thank you." "They'll do it again unless someone makes it not worth doing," Harry said. "Do you know any defensive spells?" "Some," she said. "I'm good at Protego." "That's a good one." He looked at her wand hand. "Work on the cast speed. You want it fast enough they don't have time to grab for it in the first place." She looked at him for a moment. "You're Harry Potter," she said. "Richard's Grim," he said. "But yes." She seemed to consider whether to be impressed about this, and he appreciated that she didn't immediately land on all. "I'm Daphne Greengrass," she said. "My family we're old money, traditional, but not Death Eaters. My father always said there's a difference and it matters." "Your father sounds like a careful thinker," Harry said. "He is." A pause. "You're going to make things interesting at Hogwarts, aren't you?" "I'm going to try to learn things," Harry said, honestly. "Whether that makes things interesting is sort of up to everyone else." Hermione was at the alley mouth with her bag reorganized and an expression that said she'd seen most of what had happened. She looked at Daphne. "I'm Hermione Granger," she said. "Daphne Greengrass." A brief assessment, both directions, and then Daphne's chin came up slightly. "You're Muggle-born." "Yes," Hermione said, with complete composure. "Those boys were idiots," Daphne said. "That's a position I'm prepared to hold at Hogwarts." "Good," Hermione said, and extended her hand. Reed, who had materialized quietly behind Hermione with his notebook in hand and the scanner running because of course it was, looked at Harry over the two girls' handshake and said nothing. But his expression said, "I see what you're doing, and I think you're doing it correctly." Harry shrugged one shoulder, as if to say, "I'm not doing anything. Things are just happening." Ollivander's was last, as planned. The shop was narrow and deep and smelled of cedar and sawdust and something older than both, the deep, ambiguous smell of places where important things have been happening for a very long time. Mr. Ollivander himself appeared from between the shelves with the unhurried manner of someone who moved through the world according to his own temporal logic. He was old in the way that certain old things were old, not decrepit, just ancient. His eyes were pale silver and fixed on Harry's forehead for exactly half a second before moving to his face, and then something in those eyes shifted. "Mr. Potter," he said. "I wondered." "Richard's Grim," Harry said. "Of course. But you are James Potter's son, and Lily Evans' son, and I made both their wands. He tilted his head. 11 years I've been wondering what wand would find you. He looked at Harry's right hand. May I? Harry extended his hand, and Ollivander took it with the delicacy of a professional doing the most critical part of a careful job. He turned it over. He looked at the palm, the fingers, and then he paused. The scanner on Reed's belt beeped once, a tone that meant unusual reading, and Reed went very still. You are not a standard magical signature, Ollivander said, which was possibly the politest thing anyone had said about this fact. No, Harry agreed. You have layers. Ollivander released his hand and moved back into the shelves. The cascade of boxes that followed was extraordinary. Harry counted 14 wands tried in the first 10 minutes, which Ollivander seemed to find both frustrating and progressively more interesting. Each wand produced something, sparks, light, once a sound like a string plucked, but nothing that settled. Your magic is not consistent, Ollivander said, from deep in the shelves. Not an accusation. An observation. It's consistent, Harry said. It's just, wide. Wide, Ollivander repeated, in the tone of someone who hadn't heard that word applied to a magical signature before. There was a pause, then a different kind of movement in the shelves, less searching, more deliberate. When he emerged, he was holding a box that was different from the others, darker wood, older looking, set with a small brass clasp. He set it on the counter with the careful attention of someone presenting something significant. Holly and Phoenix Feather, 11 inches, he said. I made this wand 40 years ago and have not sold it. Something told me to keep it. He paused. I think I understand why now. He opened the box. The wand inside was plain, holly wood, warm brown, nothing visually remarkable. Harry looked at it, and the warmth in his chest, the pilot light, flared. He picked it up. What happened was not a shower of sparks or a beam of light or any of the 14 previous attempts' polite suggestions of compatibility. What happened was that the room changed temperature, warmer, suddenly, perceptibly, and every other wand box on the counter shivered. The dust on the shelves shifted. The windows, which had been clouded with London grey, went briefly, startlingly clear. And around Harry's hand, visible only for 2 or 3 seconds, something like Aurora Borealis played in miniature, gold and blue and a deep, cosmic violet that Reed's scanner registered and would later spend 6 days trying to categorize. Then it settled. The wand hummed, very softly, the way a person hums without knowing they're doing it. Well, said Ollivander softly, and it was the single most sincere word Harry had heard him speak. Well, indeed. He looked at Harry with those silver eyes, and this time the look was not professional assessment but something closer to genuine wonder. That wand has a brother. The wand that gave you your scar. A pause. I have thought a great deal about what that means. I suspect you have also. Starting to, Harry said. Curious, Ollivander murmured. Curious. In all my years, the wand choosing the wizard is always the truest test. Your wand did not choose the wizard I expected. What wizard did you expect? Ollivander studied him for a long moment. One less certain of himself, he said finally. The legend tends toward tragedy. What you are is, he gestured, slightly, at the still vibrating room. Considerably more complicated. Reed paid for the wand with the specific quiet efficiency of a man who was not going to make a scene about the 5 pages of notes he'd just taken in 20 minutes. Harry tucked the wand into his jacket pocket, it sat beside the folded cloak and it fit there as naturally as something returning to where it lived. Outside, the day had gone early afternoon gold, the alley busy and loud and warm. Harry stood on the pavement for a moment and Reed stood beside him and neither of them said anything. The wand in his pocket hummed. The cloak folded neatly against his ribs. Ahead of them, the alley bustled on, full of the ordinary extraordinary life of a world that didn't know him, not really. Not yet. You want to know what I felt, Harry said. I always want to know what you felt, Reed said. Like the wand already knew it had been waiting. Harry looked down the alley. Like it recognized something in me that's been here since the beginning. Before all of you, before New York. Something that was always going to be this. A pause. That doesn't make the rest of you less part of it. If anything, you're why it's this shape. Reed was quiet for a moment. Harry, he said. Yeah. Ollivander said the legend tends toward tragedy. Yeah. You're not interested in tragedy. Harry looked at him, and his eyes were exactly what they'd always been, bright and warm and completely, unshakably clear. No, he said simply. I'm interested in what's next. Reed nodded. He put the notebook in his pocket. There's a shop here that apparently sells magical astronomy equipment. I noticed it on the way. Reed. Purely observational interest. We have 15 minutes before the port key. That's possibly enough time. Harry laughed and took his father's elbow and steered him back up Diagon Alley through the golden afternoon, and the alley moved around them, and the wand hummed against his hip, and somewhere above them an owl turned in the London sky, carrying nothing and watching everything. The morning of September 1st arrived with the brisk clarity of a day that knew it was important. The Baxter Building had been organized into contained crisis management since 6 a.m. Ben had made breakfast, which in Ben's case meant a quantity of food calibrated for a family 4 times their size, and everyone had eaten in the specific way of people who are cheerful because the alternative is too large to look at directly. Harry's trunk was packed and sealed and sitting by the door with the invisibility cloak in the inner jacket pocket and the wand in the outer, and he was wearing the Hogwarts robes over a t-shirt that said Fantastic Four because Johnny had put it in his trunk at some point last week and Harry had found it this morning and put it on deliberately. Johnny had, upon seeing this, pointed at him and said, "That's my boy," with a conviction that suggested he might cry, which he would deny. They took a car to King's Cross. Reed was explaining something about magical transport theory. Sue was holding Harry's hand in the back seat, not in the way she held it when he was small, but in the way of an equal, fingers laced, just present. Ben sat in the front with the quiet solidity of someone who had decided the best thing he could do for the next 2 hours was be a constant. King's Cross was ordinary crowds and ordinary noise and the smell of trains, and they found the barrier between platforms 9 and 10 and stood in front of it, all 5 of them, and Harry looked at it. "Wall," he said. "Magic wall," Johnny said. "Distinguished difference. You want me to come through with you?" Reed asked. "I'll be fine," Harry said. He turned and looked at them, really looked, the way you look at things you're taking with you. Reed with his notebook still in his pocket and the perpetual slight distraction of a mind that never stops. Sue, who had told him once that the thing she'd been most afraid of in her life was not any of the things that could kill her but the idea of losing her family. Johnny, who loved extravagantly and loudly and never once made it complicated. Ben, who was looking at Harry right now with an expression that took up his entire rocky face and was trying very hard to look like something simpler than what it was. Harry hugged Sue first. She held on for a moment that was exactly the right length. "I've got you in here," he said, tapping his chest. "That doesn't go anywhere." "I know," she said. He shook Reed's hand and then Reed pulled him in, brief and fierce, in the way that Reed hugged, slightly unpracticed, entirely genuine. "Write down anything interesting that happens," Reed said into his shoulder. "I'll send you the data," Harry said. Johnny clapped him on the shoulder. "Make them all look boring," he said. "Represent." "Always," Harry said, and grinned. Ben was last. Harry stood in front of him and Ben was looking at him with that enormous careful expression and Harry stepped in and pressed his face against Ben's chest the way he had since he was 3 years old, and Ben's arms came around him, careful, precise, devastating in their gentleness, and neither of them said anything for a moment. "Every week," Harry said. "Every week," Ben said, his voice like gravel settling. "I know who I am," Harry said. "I know you know," Ben said. Harry stepped back. Picked up the trolley with his trunk. Turned to the barrier. He looked at the solid brick wall and felt the magic on the other side of it, warm and alive and waiting, and thought, all right then. He walked through. The platform on the other side was steam and noise and the particular compressed energy of 100 children at the beginning of something. The Hogwarts Express stood at the platform in brilliant scarlet, exhaling steam in great satisfied puffs. Families all around, noise and owls and last instructions being delivered at varying volumes. Harry stood on the platform, trunk on the trolley, wand in his pocket, cloak against his ribs, and the warm pulse of his magic steady in his chest. He breathed in the steam and the magic and the beginning of things. Then he found a compartment, loaded his trunk, sat down, and watched the platform through the window as the engine built its steam. In the crowd, just before the barrier, he caught one last glimpse of 4 figures, one orange, one blazing with restrained fire, one dark-haired and shimmering with a force field she wasn't even trying to keep contained, one elastically long-necked and already writing something in a notebook. He pressed his hand flat to the glass. The window warmed under his palm. The Hogwarts Express began to move. Chapter 3, Hogwarts, and what it thought it knew. The Hogwarts Express took 7 hours and Harry spent most of them being interested in things. He'd claimed a compartment at the front of the train and within the first hour it had accumulated people the way interesting spaces tend to. First Hermione, who arrived with a book already open and sat down across from him with the comfort of someone continuing a conversation rather than starting one. Then a red-headed boy who stuck his head in, looked around, said, "Everywhere else is full or awful," and sat down with the directness of someone who had 6 older brothers and had long ago stopped worrying about whether he was welcome. "Ron Weasley," he said, extending a hand. "Harry Richards Grim," Harry said. Ron's eyes moved to the scar with the particular speed of someone who'd been told about it and had been trying not to look. He shook hands anyway, which Harry respected. "My mum tried to explain you," Ron said. "She got a bit overwhelmed." "A lot of people do," Harry said, without any particular feeling about it. "She said you were supposed to come live with your mum's sister but ended up somewhere else instead." "America." Ron looked around the compartment with the frank curiosity of someone who found the world generally interesting. "What's America like?" "Large," Harry said. "Loud. Good pizza. Is it true you live with the Fantastic Four?" "I was raised by them, yes." Ron absorbed this. "The thing is your uncle." "Ben, yes." "Bloody hell," Ron said, with honest admiration, and then looked at Hermione as if checking whether he was allowed to swear, and then looked back at Harry as if deciding he probably was. Hermione, without looking up from her book, said, "I've already established that Harry is remarkable. You can stop being amazed now and ask actual questions." "That's Hermione," Harry said. "She has standards." "I can see that," Ron said, and grinned, and that was that. They talked for most of the run north. Ron knew the wizarding world the way Harry knew physics, not from study but from absorption, from growing up inside it, and he gave it freely and without condescension, which Harry noted. He knew all the families, the politics between them, the gossip, the Quidditch standings, the particular reputation of each Hogwarts house. Hermione cross-referenced everything Ron said against what she'd read, which irritated Ron mildly and impressed him considerably more than he showed. Harry listened to both of them and built a picture. By the time the train began the long descent into the Scottish countryside, Harry had a working map of the social topology he was entering and a reasonably good sense of the 2 people he was entering it with. Ron was generous and genuine and loyal in a way that was structural. It wasn't a decision he made, it was just what he was made of. Hermione was brilliant and slightly terrified of being wrong, which was the most sympathetic kind of brilliant, and she'd already revised one of her conclusions mid-conversation when Harry had pointed out a counterexample, which was the mark of an actual thinker. He liked them both without reservation, which was how Harry tended to like people, immediate and complete. "What do you think you'll be sorted into?" Ron asked, as the train lights came on against the darkening outside. "I genuinely don't know," Harry said. "You'll be Gryffindor," Hermione said. "Statistically, based on everything you've described about your personality and decision-making patterns, you've been analyzing my personality?" Harry asked. She didn't look up. I analyze everything. You don't mind. This was true. What are you? A brief pause. Gryffindor, I think. Possibly Ravenclaw. She finally looked up. I care about knowledge, but I care more about doing something with it. Gryffindor, Ron confirmed. Definitely. I'll be Gryffindor too. My whole family is. He said it without pressure, just as fact. No stress if you're not, obviously. My dad says the house thing gets overblown. Your dad sounds sensible, Harry said. He's mad about muggles, Ron said, with affection. He'd lose his mind talking to your dad. I'll introduce them, Harry said. The boats across the Black Lake were cold and quiet, and Harry sat in his with his hands on the gunwales and felt Hogwarts before he saw it, the way it sat in the landscape, enormous and rooted and old in a way that made Diagon Alley feel recent. The magic of it was layered and complex, centuries of accumulated intent and use pressed into every stone, and it recognized Harry's approach the way an old dog recognizes someone it hasn't seen in a long time. Not memory. Older than memory. Something structural. You can feel it, Hermione said, watching his face. Can't you? She hesitated. A little. Like pressure. She looked at the castle. What does it feel like to you? Harry looked up at the castle as the boats carried them across. Towers against the stars, hundreds of lit windows, the massive doors ahead. Like it's been waiting, he said. Not for me specifically. Just, for whatever comes next. It's very patient. Professor McGonagall met them in the entrance hall with the brisk competence of someone who had done this 400 times and still took it seriously every time. She explained the sorting, and Harry listened and Hermione listened in the intense way that meant she was trying to memorize, and Ron was managing the specific nervous energy of someone who'd done this once in his head with a good outcome but understood you couldn't guarantee it. The other first years were various degrees of terrified and excited, and Harry was neither, which made him slightly different from the group in a way that Professor McGonagall noticed. She looked at him twice in the way of someone calibrating, not suspicious, more like adjusting her expectations. Then the doors to the great hall opened. Harry had known the hall would be large. He hadn't expected the feeling of walking into it, the enchanted ceiling doing its dark sky with stars act, the hundreds of students at 4 long tables, the warm blaze of candles. The noise dropped when the first years filed in, the way it always did, and then recovered. Except for a specific ripple near the Gryffindor table, and then a second near the Hufflepuff table, and then something spreading that wasn't noise but was its opposite, the active quiet of 300 people trying to see one thing. Harry walked in at his own pace, easy and unhurried, and looked at the hall with clear interest. At the staff table, a man in a purple robe with silver stars caught Harry's eye and held it for a moment. White beard, half-moon spectacles, eyes that were remarkable even at distance. He inclined his head slightly. Harry returned the gesture and looked away first, not from disrespect but because the castle was more interesting. In the front row of Slytherin table, he caught Malfoy watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read. He gave him a brief nod. Malfoy, after a fractional pause, nodded back. Across the hall, at the teacher's table, one figure was conspicuously not watching Harry, a man in black, hooked nose, controlled face, who was looking at his goblet with the pointed attention of someone who is very deliberately not doing something obvious. Harry filed that away. Professor Quirrell, who sat 2 seats down, was watching him with a watery smile that had something wrong underneath it. Harry noticed this too. The cosmic awareness brushed against something, not a full read, more like touching a door with heat behind it, and he kept walking. The sorting hat sat on a stool, and when McGonagall placed it on Harry's head it took hold of his mind with the comfortable confidence of something that had never failed at this task. Then it went very quiet. Well, the hat said, inside his head. That's new. Am I the first unusual one you've had? Harry thought back, with genuine curiosity. I have had 1,000 years of students. I have sorted the brilliant, the broken, the brilliant and broken simultaneously. A pause that felt like something ancient turning a new object over carefully. I have not had one whose mind has. Another pause. It's like a house with rooms built in different architectural styles that somehow all work together. I'll take that as a compliment. It is one. The hat moved through him, not intrusively, more like scanning. You have the courage that Gryffindor prizes, and it is not performed. You have the intellectual hunger Ravenclaw values, and it is genuine. You have the loyalty of Hufflepuff that is structural, not chosen. And you have, something in the hat's voice shifted, slower now, more careful, an ambition. Not for power. For understanding. For knowing all the things and doing all the things and being as large as you are capable of being. Is that Slytherin? Harry asked. In its best form, yes. A long pause. You would be exceptional in any house. This is genuinely true. But the question I always ask is not where you would be best, but where you would be most. And? You already know the answer. You've known since you walked into this hall. Harry considered. The hat was right, in the way things that have been sorting people for 1,000 years were often right. Then let's go. Gryffindor, the hat announced. The Gryffindor table erupted. Harry removed the hat and walked to the cheering table and sat down beside a set of Weasley twins who immediately introduced themselves as Fred and George and told him they had high hopes for his tenure, which Harry found both threatening and encouraging. He looked across the hall. At the teacher's table, Dumbledore was applauding with the rest but watching Harry with those remarkable eyes, and his expression was the one Harry had already learned to read from the note in the Hogwarts letter, pleased, interested, and running several calculations simultaneously. At the end of the Slytherin table, Quirrell's smile had not moved from his face. It had not changed at all, in fact, which was the thing about it that was wrong. The next morning, Harry went to his first class and understood within 20 minutes that Hogwarts standard curriculum was going to require some calibration. Not because it was beneath him, that wasn't quite it. It was more that the curriculum had been built assuming a specific kind of magical knowledge as its foundation, and Harry's foundation was different. Not smaller. Different. Transfiguration, which was first period with Professor McGonagall, involved turning a matchstick into a needle. Harry listened to the theory, which was clean and elegant, and then looked at the matchstick. The needle appeared before McGonagall had finished her demonstration. She turned around and looked at Harry's desk. She looked at Harry. She looked at the needle, which was perfect in every particular, and then she looked at his hands, which were flat on the desk because he hadn't reached for his wand. Mr. Richards Grim, she said. Did you use your wand? No, Harry said. That is, wandless transfiguration is significantly above the first-year curriculum. I understand the principle, Harry said. It seemed like the most direct method. He paused. Should I have used the wand? McGonagall was quiet for a moment. For the purposes of this class, she said carefully, I would ask you to use the wand so that I can assess your technique properly. Wandless work is, she seemed to be searching for the right word. We'll discuss it separately. Of course, Harry said, and picked up the wand, and the next exercise produced the correct result in the correct way, and McGonagall moved on, but twice during the rest of the lesson Harry caught her looking at him with the expression of someone revising a document they'd thought was finished. Hermione, beside him, leaned close and murmured, you could have eased into it. Where's the data in that? Harry said. The data is that you've now got every teacher in the school paying close attention to you. Good, Harry said. That means I can ask better questions. She looked at him. You're either going to be very helpful or very annoying to the educational system here. Why not both? Harry said. Defense against the dark arts was Quirrell's class, and Harry walked in already attentive in the way he was attentive to the door with heat behind it feeling. Quirrell's classroom smelled faintly of garlic, which Harry suspected was not for vampires. He sat in the second row where he had clear sight lines to both the teacher and the exit, because Sue had taught him to always know where exits were. Quirrell himself was the most interesting performance Harry had encountered in the school so far. The stammer, the nervous tics, the general air of a man who'd rather be somewhere else, it was all technically present, but there was something underneath it that didn't match. The hands moved too steadily for a nervous man. The eyes tracked the room too precisely. And the thing Harry's cosmic awareness kept brushing against, that warm door feeling, was strongest in this room, and it was pointing directly at Quirrell's turban. Harry did not do anything about this. He sat in the second row and learned the counterjinx for the Jellylegs hex and did it correctly on the first try without remarkable theatrics and said nothing unusual. But he listened to Quirrell with two layers of attention, the surface layer learning the curriculum, and the deeper layer cataloging everything that didn't fit. By the end of the first week, three things had become apparent about Harry's position at Hogwarts. First, his academic ability was not going to be containable within the standard curriculum. McGonagall had already arranged a conversation with Flitwick, who had taught Harry his first charms class and subsequently gone back to his office and, by rumor, sat quietly for 10 minutes. Flitwick was a dueling champion, and he had watched Harry cast Wingardium Leviosa on the first attempt and then, without being asked, make it rotate on 3 axes simultaneously, and his response had been to ask Harry 4 technical questions in rapid succession with the excitement of a man who had been waiting for an interesting problem. Second, the other students had decided Harry was something worth paying attention to, but couldn't agree on what kind of thing. Gryffindors were proud of him in the general tribal way. Ravenclaws kept trying to start theoretical conversations, which Harry always engaged with willingly. Hufflepuffs were mostly curious and warm. Slytherins were divided, about half seemed to be waiting to see which way things fell, and the other half, including a significant proportion of the vocal ones, were decided that Harry was a problem. Third, Draco Malfoy was none of these things. He was, instead, doing something Harry found more interesting than any of the other responses. He was watching, steadily and carefully, with the attention of someone who was updating a position rather than defending one. Harry noticed this and left it alone to develop. The Quidditch conversation happened in the second week, when Oliver Wood found Harry in the common room and presented the situation with the focused intensity of a man who had identified a solution to a problem he'd had for 3 years. Harry had listened to the pitch, Seeker, fastest flyer in a generation according to Wood Scouts, the most important position on the team, and said yes because it sounded like flying, and Harry had always wanted to fly properly. The first time he got on a broom, alone on the practice pitch at 6 in the morning before anyone else was awake, he understood immediately that it was not entirely unlike what he occasionally did accidentally in his sleep, that floating and drifting feeling, the same lightness. His magic recognized the broom as a tool and adapted to it in under 30 seconds, and he was 50 feet up in the cold Scottish air before he'd had time to be cautious about it. Then he pushed the broom and the world fell away beneath him and he went very fast. He'd been flying for 40 minutes when McGonagall arrived on the pitch with Oliver Wood at her elbow, both of them slightly out of breath and looking up at him as he brought the broom down in a controlled descent. "How long have you been up?" McGonagall asked. 40 minutes, roughly, Harry said. He wasn't even breathing hard. Wood looked at him with the reverent expression of a man who has seen a miracle and is trying to be professional about it. "Have you flown before?" "Not on a broom," Harry said. "The principal transfers." Wood opened his mouth. Closed it. Opened it again. "The principle," he repeated. "Of flight," Harry said. "Lift and drag and angle of attack. It's the same physics." "He's from New York," McGonagall said, to Wood, in the tone of someone explaining a natural phenomenon. "Right," Wood said. He looked at Harry. "Come to practice Thursday. Please." "Sure," Harry said, and got back on the broom, because the sky was clear and he had another 20 minutes before breakfast. October moved through Hogwarts with the wet chill of Scottish autumn, and Harry moved through October with the attentive ease of someone learning a new place's rhythms. He wrote to Ben every week, real letters, specific ones, filling the lined paper with things that had happened and thoughts that were developing and occasional questions, because Ben's replies were thoughtful in the way Ben always was, cutting to the center of things without unnecessary approach. Reed sent him a letter in the third week that was 12 pages long and contained a new theoretical framework for the resonance overlap problem Harry and Hermione had been discussing in Flourish and Blots. Harry gave Hermione the relevant pages and she read them in one sitting and wrote Reed a letter of response, which began what would become a sustained three-way correspondence that Hermione later described as the most useful education she received at Hogwarts. Sue wrote to ask how he was sleeping. He wrote back, "Well, the Scottish dark is good for sleeping, the ghosts leave his dormitory alone because he'd had a frank conversation with nearly headless Nick in week 2 and Nick had been charmed into cooperation." She wrote back, "Only my son would have a polite negotiation with a ghost and win." He kept that letter. Johnny sent a postcard with a drawing of himself on fire and the message, "School any good? Flame on, H." He taped it inside his trunk. The troll happened on Halloween, which in retrospect Harry should have predicted because things tended to organize themselves dramatically around significant dates. He'd been at the Halloween feast with Ron and the majority of Gryffindor table, working through an excellent approximation of roast something while Hermione was, Ron had mentioned, with the specific guilty look of someone who knows something is partially their fault, crying in the girls' bathroom on the second floor, because of an incident with Draco Malfoy earlier in the day that Harry had not been present for and was therefore hearing about for the first time. He set down his fork. "Where exactly?" "Second floor," Ron said. "Girls' bathroom, near the, how long ago?" "Maybe an hour, Harry," but Harry was already up, moving with the unhurried quickness that confused people because it looked calm while covering ground very fast. Ron scrambled up behind him, and they were in the corridor and heading for the stairs when the hall behind them erupted into chaos, a different quality of noise from feast noise, a screaming noise, and then the ceiling shook. Professor Quirrell appeared in the hall doorway, already running, face white as chalk. "Troll," he said, in a voice that carried. "In the dungeons." Troll in the dungeons, he fainted, which added performance to the scene in a way Harry noted automatically. The panic that followed was what it was, hundreds of children and insufficient adult coordination. Harry and Ron didn't stop moving. They were already at the stairs while the prefects were still trying to get their houses organized, and Harry was already doing the spatial calculation, a troll in the dungeons, Hermione on the second floor, the troll's most likely path if it had moved from where it was reported. He smelled it before he heard it. The way you smelled a blocked drain in a hot room. "That's not in the dungeons," Ron said. "No," Harry said. "It moved." They came around the corner of the second-floor corridor just as the troll, 12 feet tall, gray-green, carrying a club the size of a young tree with the intellectual engagement of something that had found a new environment to break, put its shoulder through the girls' bathroom door. Harry stopped Ron with one arm. "Stay in the corridor," he said. "You're not going in there alone, Ron." He looked at him. "Stay in the corridor. If I need you, I'll shout." He walked into the bathroom. The troll was still in the process of destroying the doorframe, enthusiastically, comprehensively. The bathroom was half rubble already, ceramic and plaster, and Hermione was pressed into the far corner behind a collapsed sink partition with her arms over her head and her wand nowhere in evidence because she'd lost it in the debris. Harry stood in the middle of the bathroom and the troll noticed him. It was very large. It smelled exactly as bad as advertised. It raised its club with the straightforward menace of a creature that had never encountered something it couldn't solve by hitting it. Harry raised one hand. Not theatrically. Just to give the troll something to look at while his magic assessed the situation, 4 points of contact with the floor, enormous momentum if it charged, club with roughly 2 tons of kinetic force behind it, low ceiling which was a liability for the troll specifically, Hermione's position behind the partition, Hermione's approximate composure level which was as good as could be reasonably expected. The troll swung. The club stopped 8 inches from Harry's head. Not because he'd moved, he was standing exactly where he'd been standing. The air around him had simply stopped the club, the shield expanding outward in a responsive curve that matched the swing's arc, and the troll's own force rebounded up through its arm, and it stumbled. "Hermione," Harry said, in a normal voice. "Wand. Where?" A short silence. Then, from behind the partition, I dropped it. I think it's under the second sink from the left, the broken one. He didn't look away from the troll. His free hand gestured toward the second sink from the left and the wand came up through the rubble and hovered. Can you catch? He asked. Yes, she said, and it sailed over the partition. The troll, which had been processing its rebounded force and had now recovered, swung again. Harry sidestepped this time, no shield, just movement, the liquid, unhurried sidestep of someone who knew where their body was at all times. The club hit the floor and took out a 6-foot section of tile and the troll turned. Harry was already behind it. He put one hand on the troll's lower back, not a push. A burn. A focused, surgical application of fire that ran magical and physical simultaneously, the heat sharp and specific, aimed at the nervous cluster where a stunning spell would go if Harry had wanted to be conventional about it. The troll made a sound that wasn't quite pain. Trolls didn't exactly do pain, but was something related, a system interrupt, and sat down hard. The floor cracked. The troll didn't get back up. It sat in the wreckage of the bathroom and blinked slowly, its system interrupted in a way it didn't have vocabulary for. It was not injured. It was simply, off. Harry looked at it for a moment, making sure. Then he turned. Hermione had come out from behind the partition. She was covered in plaster dust and holding her wand in both hands and she was looking at Harry with an expression that was not fear and was not awe and was not quite any single recognizable thing but was probably the combined output of 3 different emotions running simultaneously in a very precise mind. Are you hurt? Harry asked. No. A pause. You burned it. A little. It's fine. It'll clear in an hour. He looked at the troll, then back at her. We should get out before the teachers arrive. Why? Because explaining will take longer than we have before curfew, Harry said, and also because the bathroom is mostly ceiling now. She looked up. He was correct about the ceiling. Right, she said. Yes. They came out into the corridor where Ron was standing with his wand drawn and his face at an interesting color somewhere between white and the particular Weasley red. He looked at Harry. He looked at Hermione. He looked at the sounds coming from the bathroom, which were the sounds of an extremely confused troll sitting in rubble. That was about 60 seconds, Ron said. 45, Harry said. Roughly. The troll, it's fine, Harry said. We should move. They moved. The teachers arrived 3 minutes later, led by McGonagall and followed closely by Snape and Quirrell. By the time they found the children, properly arranged in the corridor, apparently returning from the wrong direction from the common room, an explanation that was technically assembled from true components, the troll was still sitting in the bathroom and the corridor was intact and nobody was bleeding. McGonagall's professional composure won over her evident desire to ask what had actually happened. She took 30 points from Gryffindor for being in the corridor, gave back 25 for dealing with what she called the situation, and delivered a lecture that Harry accepted with respectful attention because it was the right thing to do. Quirrell was standing slightly back from the group, his face still white, but white in a different way now. White in the way of someone who had received information that was concerning. Snape was looking at Harry's hands. Harry looked at Snape with the same clear, direct attention he gave everything, and Snape looked away first, which was interesting. When they got back to the common room, Hermione sat down across from Harry and Ron at the table near the fire and she was very still for a moment in the way she got when she was about to say something she'd been composing since it happened. Thank you, she said. Really? Obviously, Harry said. No, I mean, she pressed her lips together. I had read about trolls. I had the theory. I froze. That's not weakness, Harry said. That's accurate assessment that the theory wasn't enough. You update. That's right. You didn't freeze, she said. I was raised by people who fought bigger things than trolls, Harry said honestly. I'm not braver than you. I just have more data on large threats. She looked at him for a moment, and then something in her expression settled into something different, less assessment, more simply there. "Friends, then," she said. "Weren't we already?" Harry asked. "I was waiting to be sure," she said. "That's very you," Ron said, from behind his pumpkin juice. "Thank you," Hermione said, which was not what he'd meant it as and worked anyway. The next morning at breakfast, the hall had the specific quality of a place where a story had been told several different ways overnight and hadn't settled yet. People kept looking at the Gryffindor table. Harry ate his eggs and talked to Ron about Quidditch, which was a topic Ron could sustain indefinitely. At the Slytherin table, Malfoy was watching again. But there was something different today, a quietness. The ongoing assessment without the aristocratic edge. After breakfast, as students filed out toward morning classes, he fell into step beside Harry in the corridor in a way that was deliberate but not aggressive. "The troll," he said. "Word travels fast," Harry said. Pansy Parkinson was in the bathroom 2 doors down. "She said she heard," he stopped. "She said there was fire." "There was," Harry said. A pause. "The teachers are saying you used a stunning spell and Hermione Granger used Wingardium Leviosa to drop the club." "The teachers are working with the information they have," Harry said. Malfoy was quiet for several steps. "What are you?" he asked, and it wasn't hostile, it was the actual question, asked by someone who genuinely wanted to know. Harry looked at him. "Something that doesn't have a category here," he said. "Not evasion." "Actual answer." Malfoy seemed to consider this. "My father thinks you're a problem," he said, which in context felt like disclosure rather than threat. "What do you think?" Harry asked. A long pause. They were at the fork in the corridor, Harry's class left, Malfoy's right. Malfoy stopped at the fork and looked at Harry with the calculating eyes of someone making a decision that will have consequences. "I think," Malfoy said carefully, "that you're something nobody here is ready for. And I'm trying to decide if that's interesting or dangerous." "Could be both," Harry said. "Yes," Malfoy said. "Could be both." He went right. Harry went left, and Hermione fell into step beside him from where she'd been half a corridor back, and said quietly, "That was a recruitment conversation." "Which direction?" Harry asked. "Both of you trying to recruit the other," she said. "Maybe," Harry said. "Or just 2 people trying to understand where the lines are. Do you want him on your side?" Harry thought about it honestly. "I want him to make his own choices," he said. "That's not the same thing, but it leads to the same place if the choices are good ones." Hermione absorbed this. "You're more of a strategist than you let on," she said. "I learned from Reed," Harry said. "Everything is data." The afternoon of the troll incident had another consequence Harry hadn't anticipated, which was that the castle itself seemed to shift slightly. Not physically, not perceptibly to anyone without his particular sensitivity, but the old magic in the stones changed its quality around him, the way a dog that had been deciding about you suddenly leans in. Hogwarts had been noticing him since he arrived. Since the troll, it seemed to have made up its mind. Doors opened for him occasionally that didn't for other people. Twice, staircases rearranged themselves to shorten his route in ways that weren't on any of the maps. The portraits in the corridor nearest Gryffindor Tower started acknowledging him by name, which apparently happened to very few students and usually took years. He didn't mention this to anyone except Hermione, who found it fascinating and started researching the castle's sentient properties at a pace that suggested she'd forgotten to sleep. The third notable thing that happened in October was the library. Harry had been in the restricted section 3 times by the time Madame Pants noticed. Not sneak-in visits, the first time, he'd gone directly to Madame Pants and asked for access to a specific text on defensive magic theory that was restricted for reasons he suspected were more institutional habit than genuine danger. She'd said no. He'd asked why. She'd said restricted books required signed teacher permission. He'd gone directly to Flitwick, who had given him a signed note with the specific speed of a man who wanted to see what Harry would do with the information. The second and third times were with Dumbledore's personal note of permission, which had arrived in the fourth week, unrequested, which was interesting, accompanied by a brief line saying that Harry would find it more efficient than asking each time, which told Harry something about how Dumbledore processed information. It was in the restricted section that Harry found the first real reference to the stone. Not in any book specifically about it. In a margin, a handwritten note in a book about alchemy, small and precise, years old, the stone is on the third floor. The dog is a misdirection. What guards the stone is the stone's nature. Beneath it, in different ink, different hand, X has already moved it once. Beneath that, in a third hand, very recent, not for long. Harry stood in the restricted section with this book and he read those 3 notes very carefully. Then he went back to the relevant alchemy text and read the whole chapter, and then 2 surrounding chapters, and then he closed the book and put it back on the shelf and stood there for a moment. He said, to no one. The warm door feeling at the back of his mind, the one that pointed at Quirrell's turban, pulsed once, as if confirming something. He went to dinner. He talked to Ron about Quidditch. He helped Hermione untangle a knot in her theory about switching spells. He was completely present and normal and cheerful throughout, because thinking had never required him to look like he was doing it. But when he got into bed that night and the dormitory went quiet, he lay with his hands behind his head and looked at the ceiling and assembled what he had. Quirrell. The turban. The stone on the third floor. The corridor with the 3-headed dog that he'd accidentally opened on his first week, having not read the notice about it. The dog had been perfectly friendly for the 30 seconds before Harry had closed the door again, and he'd felt the trapdoor under the dog's feet and the magic below it. The warmth behind Quirrell's personal door that was not Quirrell's warmth. The notes in the margin. Someone was trying to get to the stone. Someone who was, if Harry's cosmic awareness was reading correctly, currently living in the school. He thought about the scar on his forehead. The thing in this world he was apparently famous for surviving. The names he'd heard, always in low voices, Voldemort. You know who. The Dark Lord. He thought about the warm door feeling and what was behind it, and he tested it, carefully, the way you tested ice, just pressure, no weight. The warmth pushed back, and for just a moment Harry felt something that was almost like recognition. Not the good kind. More like 2 things that have always been on opposite sides of the same event noticing each other. He withdrew the probe immediately and the warmth behind the door receded. He lay in the dark for another few minutes, thinking. Then he sat up, lit his wand with a small, steady light that wouldn't disturb the others, and pulled out a piece of parchment. Dear Ben, he wrote, because that was always the right place to start when he was thinking through something that mattered. I think I've found the problem this year is going to organize itself around. I'm not worried about it, I've got most of the shape of it already and the thing I'm facing, whatever it is, doesn't know what I am yet. I think that's currently my greatest advantage. The castle is good. The food is very good. Ron and Hermione are the best kind of people. Tell Sue I'm sleeping fine. Tell Reed the resonance data in the castle's ambient field is unlike anything he'll have readings for, I'm collecting what I can. Tell Johnny I burned a troll a little bit. He'll want the story. I'll explain at Christmas. Every week, he wrote at the bottom, and then underlined it once. He sealed the letter. Set it beside his trunk for the morning post. Lay back down and closed his eyes, and the Hogwarts dark settled around him, old and patient and full of its own kind of awareness, and Harry Richards-Grim fell asleep in it like someone who has no business with nightmares and knows it. Down the corridor, in the third-floor room that the student body had decided not to think too hard about, something behind a locked door and a very large sleeping dog sat in the dark and thought its own slow, patient thoughts. It would need to try a different approach, it had decided. The children who stumbled into the right places could usually be managed. This particular child, based on tonight, was going to require something more considered than management. Chapter 4, The Mirror and the Man with Two Faces. November arrived like a door being closed firmly, the Scottish weather making its position known. The Quidditch pitch was cold enough that breath came out in clouds, and Oliver would have taken to scheduling dawn practices on the grounds that the cold built character, which was the position of someone whose character had already been built and wasn't the one suffering. Harry didn't mind the cold. His body temperature had been running high enough since age 6 that he was comfortable in conditions that had Ron making small miserable sounds into his scarf from the stands, where he'd come to watch the first practice because he was a good friend and had subsequently regretted it. Harry flew like he did everything, with the complete, present attention of someone who was entirely inside the thing he was doing. Oliver had given him the basic seeker briefing: find the snitch, catch the snitch, don't die. Harry had listened and then gone up and flown in a way that had caused two beaters to stop what they were doing and simply watch, because there was technique there that Oliver recognized and something else that Oliver didn't have a word for, an instinct that operated below decision-making, a spatial awareness that processed the whole pitch simultaneously rather than in sectors. The snitch appeared on Harry's third circuit of the pitch. He caught it in 11 seconds. Oliver stood on the ground with his clipboard at his side and looked up at Harry descending and said nothing for a moment. Then, do that again. It only comes out once per practice, Harry said. I know that, Oliver said. I want to see the approach again. The approach was find it and go get it, Harry said, which was true and not the whole truth being that his cosmic awareness had felt the snitch's tiny erratic signature 3 seconds before he'd visually located it, which had given him the angle. He didn't explain this because he wasn't sure it was relevant information for Quidditch specifically, and also because Oliver would write it in the playbook and create a drill for it. He settled the snitch in his palm and felt it flutter against his fingers, its wings a tiny mechanical percussion. He held it out to Oliver. First match is December 14th, Oliver said, taking it carefully. Slytherin. I know, Harry said. You're ready, Oliver said, with the specific wonder of someone who'd wanted to say that for 3 years and was surprised by the relief of finally meaning it. The week before the first Quidditch match, Harry did something that had been pending for several weeks. He went to the 3rd floor. Not the section with Fluffy, not yet. The floor itself, which was restricted mostly by reputation rather than active magic, and which had a room at the far end of the east corridor that the castle had been pointing him toward, not with urgency but with the quiet persistent suggestion of a building that knew where important things were. The room was empty when he got there. Or appeared empty. It smelled of old wood and dust and beneath that something older, something metallic and specific that made his magic resonate in a way he recognized from the Potter Vault, old enchantment, deep and layered. He stood in the room and let his awareness move through it, and it took about 30 seconds to find the corner where the floor had been recently disturbed and the cabinet against the wall that wasn't quite sitting flush against it because of something behind it. He didn't look behind the cabinet. He noted it, filed it, and left. In the corridor on his way back he turned the corner and walked directly into Snape. This was possibly going to happen eventually and Harry had considered it. Snape stopped walking and Harry stopped walking and they stood in the deserted 3rd floor corridor and looked at each other, and Harry gave him the same open, level attention he gave everything. Snape was tall and angular and carried himself like someone who had decided years ago that defensive posture was for people who'd run out of better options. His face was controlled in the manner of someone who had turned emotional management into a martial art. He looked at Harry with the dark eyes that had been looking everywhere except at Harry since the sorting, and the thing Harry read in them was, complex. Not hostile, exactly. Not the kind of hostility that was simple dislike. Something older and more tangled than that. Mr. Richards Grimm, Snape said. The 3rd floor is restricted. The notice says the east wing is restricted, Harry said. I was in the west corridor. A pause. The west corridor is not significantly more appropriate for students after hours. I wasn't aware of a curfew violation, Harry said. The time is 6:47. Curfew is 9. Snape looked at him for a long moment. You are exactly what I expected, he said, which was not a compliment and was not quite an insult and was something Harry filed as honest. What did you expect? Harry asked, with genuine curiosity. Arrogance wearing the face of confidence, Snape said. Harry considered this. I can see why you'd read it that way, he said. The distinction is whether I've earned the certainty I'm operating from. And have you? I think so, Harry said. Though I'm aware that's what someone arrogant would also say. A brief pause. You knew my father. James Potter. The change in Snape's face was extremely small and very visible to anyone paying the kind of attention Harry was paying. I was aware of him. And my mother, Harry said. Lily Evans. Something in Snape's controlled expression moved. Not visible to most. Very visible to Harry. Also aware, Snape said, in a voice that had been carefully stripped. Harry looked at him, not reading him, just looking, with the straightforward attention of someone who wasn't trying to win anything. I'm not either of them, he said. I don't actually know who they were well enough to be like them or unlike them. I'm what I am. A pause. I thought you might want to know that. Snape stood very still for a moment. Then he said, with an effort at professional aridity that was about 70% successful, Go back to your common room, Mr. Richardsgrim. Harry went. He didn't look back. But the cosmic awareness caught the very end of Snape's stillness in the corridor, and what it brought back wasn't what he'd expected, not coldness, not the particular dislike he'd been braced for. Something that was more like an old room being opened after a long time. He filed that too. The Quidditch match on the 14th was a perfect winter morning, sharp and clear, the pitch frosted at the edges, the sky the particular deep blue that happened between clouds in Scotland. Half the school was in the stands and the other half was somewhere with less dignity. Harry sat in the Gryffindor changing room while Oliver ran through his 6th tactical revision and listened to the part that was relevant while also locating his inner warmth and settling it, because game days had a specific edge and Harry preferred to meet that edge from a place of steadiness rather than adrenaline. Ron had sent him a good luck note that said simply, "Don't fall off." Hermione had sent a book, which was technically about Quidditch aerodynamics but also technically showed that she'd spent 3 days researching something she had no personal interest in because Harry did, which was the kind of gesture Harry recognized and valued. He tucked both in his trunk and went out. The Slytherin team was already on the pitch when Gryffindor emerged, and they were well-equipped and well-practiced and moving with the choreographed precision of a team that had had 3 years to refine their coordination. Marcus Flint, the Slytherin captain, was large and angular and looked at the Gryffindor team with the comfortable confidence of someone expecting a familiar result. His eyes stopped on Harry. Harry looked back, easy and open. Flint's confidence didn't waver exactly, but it recalibrated, and Harry saw it happen. Madam Hooch ran through the rules. Harry barely listened, he knew the rules. He was watching the sky, feeling the cold, letting his awareness spread across the pitch and settle into the space. The snitch was in the box at Madam Hooch's feet. He knew its exact position. He could feel its coiled mechanical energy even through the case. He set that aside and waited. "Mount your brooms." Harry mounted. 3. The field smelled like frost and grass and anticipation. 2. 14 players, 2 goals, 1 snitch, 1 match. 1. The whistle. The first 10 minutes were proper Quidditch, both teams coordinating, the chasers running the standard patterns, the beaters controlling the bludger lanes. Harry was above most of it, doing the seeker's particular kind of waiting, not passive, but expansively attentive, covering the whole pitch in his awareness while the crowd noise ran underneath like water. Gryffindor scored twice in the first 8 minutes and Slytherin answered once, and the game was tight and loud and full of the particular compressed energy of winter Quidditch. Then one of the Slytherin beaters redirected a bludger at Harry with the specific angle of someone who'd been told to harry the seeker rather than play standard positions. The bludger came fast and straight. Harry tilted his broom 15 degrees and it went past close enough that he felt the displaced air, and he came upright again without losing altitude, barely interrupting his circuit. The second bludger came from below, redirected by the other beater, and this one Harry had to genuinely move for. He dropped 10 feet and pulled left and the bludger clipped the tail of his broom and spun it 45 degrees from true. He corrected instantly, body weight, no hesitation, and found his line again. The third bludger came from the front, which meant both beaters had been coordinating since the second one, and Harry had exactly enough time to think, that's actually good positioning before he put his left hand on the broom and rolled, inverted, the bludger passing close enough to his ribs that it would have hit anyone not lying flat along their broom, and came back upright. The crowd made the kind of noise that crowds make when something has happened that they're not entirely sure they believed. Harry was 70 feet up and scanning the pitch, and the snitch was there. 50 feet down and to the east, hovering near the middle ring of the far goal, moving in the irregular drift of a thing designed to not be predicted. He went. The dive from 70 feet was the kind of dive Oliver had said he'd never seen in 3 years coaching, and Harry had not been able to explain adequately, because it wasn't technique. It was the complete absence of hesitation, no moment between decision and execution, nothing held back, everything given to the angle and the speed and the absolute commitment of going exactly where you needed to go exactly when you needed to go there. The Slytherin seeker saw him and dove too, later and shallower, and closed significant ground because he was good, genuinely good, and Harry noted this with respect even as he extended his right hand in the last 20 feet and the snitch hit his palm and closed its wings and the whistle blew. The noise from the Gryffindor stands was physical, an actual pressure wave, and Harry pulled out of the dive 15 feet from the ground and climbed in a long, loose spiral, snitch in his fist, and for a moment the whole pitch was looking up at him. He flew back down. He landed. He opened his hand and showed Oliver the snitch. Oliver grabbed him by both shoulders and appeared to be having a private moment with a powerful emotion. "You rolled," Ron said, breathless, when Harry reached the stands afterward. "You were upside down." "Bludger," Harry said. "You were upside down and you still caught it." Right side up wasn't an option at that particular moment. "He rolled," Ron said to Hermione. "I saw," Hermione said. She handed Harry a towel. The bludger coordination from Slytherin's beaters was pre-planned. Second and third came inside 4 seconds. "I know," Harry said. "They were good." "You're better," Ron said, as if this resolved something important. "They're good," Harry said. "It matters," saying that. At the Slytherin table, Malfoy was the only one not looking thunderous. He was looking at Harry with the expression that had been there since the troll, still assessing, still updating, but with something new in it now. Something that looked, from a distance, almost like relief. Harry caught it and looked away. December settled in and the castle turned cold and gold, and things moved beneath the surface the way things did in places with their own awareness. Harry tracked the warmth behind the door, feeling at the back of his mind the way you track the position of something you didn't want to disturb prematurely, noting it, not engaging. Quirrell was in the staff room twice when Harry passed in a way that suggested he was there because Harry was, and Harry walked past both times without acknowledgement. The letters from home had taken on the warm, specific quality of things shared at distance. Ben's letter in the second week of December had made Harry laugh loud enough that his dormitory mates looked over. The building had another interdimensional incursion Tuesday. "Reed is fine. I caught the thing before it reached the lab. Johnny made the news. Sue is explaining to the press why everything is fine and also why Johnny should not have been on fire in Times Square. Everything normal here. 3 weeks, kid." He read it 3 times. 2 days before the Christmas break, Harry was in the library alone. Hermione had gone to bed, Ron had gone somewhere involving exploding snap, working on a potions essay with the particular resigned focus of someone who found the subject fascinating and the teacher's approach to it aimed consistently at making it less so. He became aware, 20 minutes in, that he wasn't alone. Not the cosmic awareness this time, just ordinary hearing, the small sounds of someone moving carefully in the stacks behind the biography section. Harry didn't look up. He kept writing and let his attention broaden, listening. The movement wasn't random. It was specific, moving toward his table in a route that tried to be indirect and wasn't entirely succeeding. Harry set down his quill. Quirrell stepped out from behind the bookcase as if he'd simply happened to be there, his face arranged in the watery nervous expression he wore like a costume, his hands folded. "Mr. Richards Grimm," he said. "Working late?" "Essay," Harry said. Potions. Ah. Quirrell moved closer, and Harry tracked him without turning his head. Fascinating subject. Underappreciated. He settled into the chair across from Harry with the casual ease of someone who believed they were controlling the situation. How are you settling in? I don't think we've had a real conversation. We haven't, Harry agreed. You're remarkable, I'm told. The watery smile. For a first year. I've had good teachers, Harry said. The Fantastic Four, Quirrell said, in a tone that treated it as an interesting footnote. Quite the upbringing. A scientist, a soldier of sorts, a daredevil, and a monster. The last word placed with care, like something set down to see if it made a sound. Harry looked at him. Directly, fully, for the first time in this conversation. Ben Grimm is not a monster, he said. His voice was even and warm and had not a single edge of defensiveness, because he wasn't defending anything, he was simply correcting a factual error. Quirrell absorbed this. The watery smile didn't waver. Of course. A figure of speech. His eyes moved to Harry's forehead with the same arrested look everyone's did, but different underneath. You know what you are to our world. I know the legend, Harry said. I don't think it matches me well. No, Quirrell said softly. I imagine not. He leaned forward slightly, and the warmth behind the door feeling intensified, stronger now, more active, pressing against the back of Harry's awareness with a quality that was deliberate. An attention. You must have questions. About what happened. About who you survived. Some, Harry said. I could tell you things, Quirrell said. About the magic that was used. That night. Things not in any book. Harry looked at him. The warmth was pressing steadily, and he could feel it now with some precision, not just Quirrell, not merely Quirrell, something behind and beneath Quirrell using Quirrell as an instrument, leaning into the conversation with the careful pressure of something testing resistance. He met that pressure. Not aggressively, he just let it find him, let it measure what it was measuring. For just a moment, the warmth behind the door thing understood what it had found. Quirrell's hand closed on the edge of the table. That's you, isn't it? Harry said, pleasantly. Not Quirrell. Well, Quirrell too, I imagine you need him. But the thing in the turban. He watched Quirrell's face. I've been able to feel you since the first day of term. That door with heat behind it feeling. That's yours. The library was very quiet. Quirrell's face had gone entirely still in a way that was nothing like the nervous mask. When he spoke, his voice was different, layered, two registers simultaneously, the watery tenor and beneath it something older and more resonant. You are perceptive, said the voice that was not entirely Quirrell's. More so than I anticipated. I've been told that, Harry said. You are not afraid, the voice observed. No, Harry said. Curious, said Voldemort, through Quirrell's mouth, with the patient interest of a being who had lived a very long time and found almost nothing surprising anymore. Every person who has felt my presence has been afraid. Without exception. I can feel that you're powerful, Harry said honestly. I'm not dismissing that. But powerful doesn't mean I should be afraid of you. He rested both hands flat on the table, open, easy, nothing to prove. What do you want from this conversation? The actual want, not the recruitment version. A pause. Then something that might have been appreciation, filtered through two voices and a situation that had not gone as planned. I want the stone, Voldemort said. Obviously. I know, Harry said. Do you intend to stop me? Harry considered this honestly. I intend to understand the full picture before I act, he said. I don't think you're going to get to the stone tonight, if that's what you're planning. The protections are significant. They are surmountable. Maybe, Harry said. But you'd need Quirrell in better condition than you'd have him in after he got through all of them, and then you'd still have to deal with the stone itself. He paused. And me, if I decided to be there. The quality of the silence changed. You're 11 years old, Voldemort said, and it was the first thing he'd said that sounded like something other than calculated engagement. Yes, Harry said. And I'm a lot of other things too. He picked up his quill. I'm going to finish my essay now. I think you should take Quirrell back to wherever he sleeps. He looks tired. The two-register voice was very still for a moment. Then, this is not over. I know, Harry said. I'll be ready when it is. He looked up one final time. Voldemort. The stone won't give you what you actually want. I think you know that. Quirrell stood up from the table with a movement that was slightly wrong, too coordinated, coming from the wrong direction of will. He walked to the library door and paused with his hand on the frame. What do you think I want? Voldemort asked. Not to be dead anymore, Harry said simply. The door closed. Harry sat in the library and let out a slow breath. The warmth behind the door feeling receded down the corridor and through the building's layers and became the distant background sensation it had been since September. He looked at his essay. He looked at the door. He looked at his hands, which were completely steady. He said, to the empty library. Then he picked up his quill and finished the essay, because it was due Friday. He told Hermione the next morning. Ron was there, eating toast with the focus of someone who hadn't had breakfast yet and was prioritizing, and Harry gave them both the account with the same even directness he used for everything. Hermione stopped eating. Ron stopped eating. They looked at Harry across the breakfast table with the specific expression of people who have received information that is substantially larger than their morning. You talked to Voldemort, Ron said. Through Quirrell, yes. In the library. Yes. Last night. Yes. Ron put down his toast. He seemed to be doing something internal. Right, he said. Okay. He picked up the toast again. And he just left. I finished my essay, Harry said. You finished, Ron pointed at him. Harry. The essay was due Friday, Harry said. Voldemort, Ron said, as if making sure he had the right word. Yes. Ron looked at Hermione. Hermione looked at Harry. You need to tell Dumbledore, she said. I will, Harry said. After Christmas. I want to understand more of the picture first. After Christmas, Hermione repeated, in her that is not the correct timeline voice. Dumbledore has known about Quirrell since at least October, Harry said. He's letting it develop for a reason. If I go to him now I disrupt that before I know what the reason is. He looked at her steadily. Also, Voldemort isn't going to move before he finds a way past the protections. He's patient. He's been patient for 10 years. How are you this calm? Ron asked. I've been thinking about it since October, Harry said. October, Ron said. You noticed in October? Hermione asked. First day of term, Harry said. The cosmic awareness thing I mentioned. Hermione and Ron looked at each other in the way they had developed for moments when Harry revealed that he had been running a parallel information process that they hadn't been aware of. Any other things you've been quietly tracking since September? Hermione asked. A few, Harry said. I'll tell you everything after Christmas. Bring parchment. She gave him the expression that meant she was deciding whether to be annoyed, and then decided not to be, and pulled her notebook from her bag. Tell me now. We have 20 minutes before class. Hermione. 20 minutes. Go. He smiled. Then he started talking, and she started writing, and Ron listened and occasionally said, "Blimey," at appropriate intervals, and the great hall moved around them in the warm, enormous way it had on ordinary mornings, and outside the windows Scotland was grey and cold and absolutely indifferent to the conversation happening within it. Christmas at the Baxter Building was the best thing Harry had experienced in the preceding 4 months, which was saying something given how good the 4 months had been. He came through the flue at King's Cross. Dumbledore had arranged UK exit travel, and took a portkey from a SHIELD contact in Manhattan to the Baxter Building's lobby, and when the lobby door opened Ben Grimm was standing on the other side with an expression on his rocky face that was trying very hard to be normal and wasn't managing it at all. Harry walked in and put his arms as far around Ben as they would go, which was not very far, and Ben's enormous careful hands came around him and the lobby smelled like the building always smelled, Reed's lab chemicals and Sue's coffee and the specific warm metal smell of Ben himself, and Harry thought, this is what I've been carrying for 4 months in my chest, this exact thing. You're taller, Ben said, into the top of his head. Half an inch, Harry said. Reed measured before I left. Reed would. He's already written it down somewhere. Notebook 40-something, yeah. Ben let him go and looked at him. You good? Very good, Harry said. Tell me everything, Ben said, which was his version of, I have been waiting and I need information, delivered as a direct request rather than pressure. I will, Harry said. Is there food? Am I me? Ben said. Reed appeared from the lab stairs in under 30 seconds of Harry's arrival, because Reed had almost certainly been monitoring the portkey network for the precise moment of arrival, and the hug he gave Harry was the particular Reed Richards hug, brief and fierce and then pulling back to look at him as if conducting an assessment, which was also an expression of love. Your magical output has increased by 11% since September, Reed said. I've been tracking the ambient readings from the spell work in your letters. You've been tracking the spell work in my letters, Harry said. Low-intensity scan. Passive. Reed. The data is remarkable, Reed said, with complete unrepentance. I'll tell you everything, Harry said. But it has to be to everyone at once because I'm not doing it 4 times. Sue came down the stairs behind Reed and Harry met her at the bottom and she held him in the specific way she held him that was both affection and the invisible force field settling around him like something that had missed its correct position, and Harry felt it, the same warmth that had always been the clearest thread between them, her shield sense resonating with his defensive magic in the way it always had. You smell like Scotland, she said. It rained for most of October, Harry said. Are you sleeping? Yes. He looked at her. Yes, really. The ghost? She asked, because he'd mentioned nearly headless Nick in a letter. He leaves my corridor alone. Good, she said, with the specific satisfaction of a mother who has successfully extended her protection by proxy to include poltergeists. Johnny was last, coming in from the kitchen at volume. There he is. There's my guy. He grabbed Harry in a headlock that was entirely affectionate and slightly aggressive. You burned a troll. I want every detail. Starting with the burn location. Tell me it was somewhere funny. Lower back, Harry said, muffled. That's beautiful, Johnny said. They sat in the Baxter Building's main living area, all 5 of them, the food that Ben had made spread across the coffee table, the city outside the windows doing its permanent bright noise, and Harry told them everything. He didn't omit Voldemort. He didn't soften the library conversation or the quarrel problem or the stone, because these were his people and they deserved the actual information. The silence when he finished was a particular kind, 5 very capable people processing threat data while simultaneously managing the specific complicated emotion of hearing about danger from someone they loved. Ben spoke first. You talked to him? Yes. He wasn't able to hurt you. Not in any way he expected to be able to, Harry said. Reed, Sue said. I'm thinking, Reed said, which was true and also meant he was very close to something he didn't want to say imprecisely. The stone. The Philosopher's Stone, based on what you've described, Voldemort wants physical resurrection. A body. If he gets the stone he gets that. Yes. Can he get through the protections? He's working on it, Harry said. He doesn't have the method yet. But he's patient and he's smart. So are you, Ben said, flat and absolute. Yes, Harry said, without modesty, because it was true and Ben was saying it as a fact rather than a comfort. I think the ending of this happens in that room below the third floor. I think that's where it was always going to come to. I just need to understand enough of the shape of it before it does. We're coming, Ben said immediately. It's a school, Ben, I don't care if it's the moon. If you're going into something that involves Voldemort, we're, Uncle Ben. Harry looked at him. I promise I'll ask if I need you. I won't do the thing where I don't ask. But I think this one is mine. Why? Ben asked, and it was the real question, the one that had been sitting under all the others. Harry thought about it honestly. Because he thinks this is about a stone and a body. It's not. It's about whether the thing that happened the night my parents died is finished or not. He touched the scar, briefly. I'm the only one who can find out what that means. And I think, he paused. I think I'm supposed to be the one who does. The room was quiet. The cosmic awareness, Reed said. Sort of, Harry said. More just, knowing. Reed wrote something in his notebook. Sue was looking at Harry with the expression of a mother managing the distance between what she wanted to do and what she knew was right. Johnny had his elbows on his knees and his chin in his hands and was looking at the floor in the way he did when he was actually serious about something. Ben was looking at Harry with all of it right there on his face, everything he'd felt for 11 years, every 2 a.m. conversation, every letter, every measurement of half an inch, all of it arranged in the expression of a person deciding, again, to trust the person they loved to know what they were doing. You call, Ben said. The second you need us. First second, Harry said. Good. Ben picked up his coffee mug, which in his hands was the size of a thimble. Tell Johnny about the troll. He's been waiting. I want burn location, trajectory, the look on its face, Johnny started. There wasn't much look, Harry said. It was more confused than anything. The look on the confused troll's face, then. Harry laughed, and the room loosened, and Christmas moved around them in all its warm ordinary extraordinary way, and for 2 weeks Harry was entirely and completely home. He came back to Hogwarts on the 2nd of January with the specific grounded quality of someone who has been correctly refueled. The castle greeted him the way it had started to, a small ambient warmth, the portraits nodding, a staircase rearranging one step without being asked. Hermione arrived 3 days later and came straight to the common room where Harry was already reading with the focused quiet of a person using the empty holiday castle efficiently. She sat down without preamble and opened her notebook. The protections under the 3rd floor, she said. I did research over Christmas. 3 of them I can identify from what you described. Devil's Snare, Sprout. Winged Keys, Flitwick. Chess, McGonagall. Potions, Snape. Troll, which has already been dealt with, Quirrell, which is interesting given, he put a troll in his own obstacle course, Harry said. He put the obstacle he was most confident he could manage, Hermione said. And that tells us something about what else he can do. Mirror, Harry said. She looked up. The last one is a mirror, Harry said. I found that much. I don't know exactly what kind. She wrote it down. Then we need to find out what kind of mirror stops someone from getting a Philosopher's Stone. Ron came back from the holidays with a new chess set and an enthusiasm for the coming term that Harry suspected had something to do with getting away from a house full of Weasleys for 2 weeks. He sat down, looked at Harry's reading and Hermione's notes, and said, Right, what did I miss? And they told him, and he said, Blimey, in 4 distinct registers over the course of 20 minutes. Then he set up the chess set and beat both of them twice, which he needed. The discovery of the Mirror of Eriste was an accident that wasn't quite an accident. Harry had been using the invisibility cloak to walk the castle at night, not hiding, exactly, more exploring, letting the castle show him things. It had a consciousness, in the way very old saturated places did, and it had been pointing him at things since October. One night in the 2nd week of January it pointed him down a corridor he hadn't been in yet, 3rd floor, west wing, a room that should have been empty per the castle's spatial logic but wasn't. The mirror was enormous, taller than a man, ornate framed, gold inscription across the top that read Eris stra eru oit ube kafru oit unwosi. Harry read it backward immediately because he was 12 and had read everything. I show not your face but your heart's desire. He stood in front of it. The image in the mirror came up slowly, like something surfacing. A woman with red hair and green eyes who was looking at him with the expression of someone seeing something they'd hoped for. A man with dark hair and glasses, standing beside her, an arm around her shoulder. Both of them reaching toward him. Both of them, full of light, the way things were in the mirror. And his family. Not instead of the Potters. With them. Reed's arm on Harry's shoulder from the right. Sue's hand in his. Johnny standing behind him with both thumbs up in the specific way he did at good moments. Ben enormous and solid and present, one hand somewhere in the background of it, the rocky hand that was always exactly as careful as it needed to be. All of them together, looking at him, and Harry in the middle of it. He stood in front of the mirror for a long time. Then he said, quietly, to the room, I already have most of this. The mirror held the image. His mother's eyes, the exact shade, the exact vivid green he saw in his own face every morning. I know I can't have it exactly as it is, Harry said. That's all right. He pressed his hand gently to the mirror's surface. Thank you for showing me, though. He took his hand away. He walked back to the dormitory, and he slept, and in the morning he wrote to Ben, found something last night. An old mirror that shows you what you want most. It showed me everyone. All of you, and my parents, together. I didn't stay long, I understand what it does to people who stay. I want you to know that the most important thing in what it showed me was already real. That's the part I'm taking with me. He sealed it and sent it. Ben's reply came 3 days later. Harry read it at breakfast, alone at the Gryffindor table in the early morning before anyone else came down. Kid, it said. That's the most important thing you've ever written to me. 3 weeks. Harry folded it carefully and put it in his jacket pocket, next to the wand. At the teacher's table, Dumbledore was eating his breakfast and not looking at Harry, which was the particular not looking of someone who was very much thinking about him. Harry looked at the old man for a moment, genuinely looked, with the full attention he rarely deployed at rest. What he saw was, old, extraordinary, exhausted in a very specific way, carrying something enormous that he'd been carrying for a very long time. And currently deeply, quietly unsettled by the 11-year-old eating toast across the hall who had, Dumbledore now understood, looked at the mirror of Eris and walked away from it under his own power. Harry looked down at his toast. At the Slytherin table, Malfoy sat down across from his usual crowd and then looked over at the Gryffindor table, found Harry, and gave him one of his small precise nods. Harry returned it. Outside the windows, Scotland was doing its grey and cold thing, and somewhere below the castle the protections waited, and somewhere inside Quirrell's turban something ancient and diminished and furious was recalibrating its approach to the problem of Harry Richardsgrim. Harry ate his toast. Chapter 5, Through the Trapdoor. The thing about Voldemort, Harry had decided, was that he was brilliant in the way that certain kinds of brilliant were also blind spots. He could plan. He could wait. He could read people with the surgical accuracy of someone who had spent a lifetime understanding fear and leverage and the specific pressure points of human want. What he couldn't do, what Harry suspected he'd never been able to do, even before the killing curse and the decade of half-existence, was account for the thing he'd never encountered. He built models of his opponents and the models were excellent and the models were the problem, because you couldn't model something you didn't have a category for. Voldemort had a model of Harry Potter, the boy who lived. Traumatized. Isolated. Famous in a world he'd been kept from. Hungry for belonging and therefore manageable. Possibly powerful in the raw, unpolished way of children with talent and no guidance. Harry had been watching this model operate since September and it was wrong in every particular. He didn't correct it. He let it run. The end-of-year exams were scheduled for the first week of June, and Harry used the revision period productively. He revised. He also, in the hours between revision sessions, finished assembling what he needed to know about the chamber below the third floor. Hermione had identified all 6 protections by the second week of May: the Devil's Snare, the Winged Keys, the chessboard, the Troll, the potions, the mirror, and had cross-referenced each one against its caster's known methodology until she had, as she put it, a working theory of the intended solution for each. "The chessboard is the most dangerous," she said. The 3 of them bent over her notes in the back corner of the library. "Real pieces, real force. Someone has to play it through, and the pieces won't yield for anything except a correct game." "Ron," Harry said. Ron looked up. "What?" "You're the best chess player I've ever seen." "You've seen 3 chess players," Ron said. "I've seen Reed play," Harry said. "Reed is extraordinary, and you beat him twice when he came for the Easter visit." "That was," Ron paused. "I mean, yes. Yes, I did." "The board is yours," Harry said. "If we go." "When we go," Hermione said. "When," Harry agreed. The decision about when was made for them on a Thursday evening in the first week of June, when Neville Longbottom came into the common room white-faced and breathing fast and said he'd seen Snape in the corridor on the 3rd floor, near the door, and Snape had been limping, which was new information that combined badly with several other pieces of information Harry had been holding. Hermione looked at Harry immediately. Ron looked at Harry. Harry was already thinking. Not Snape getting through. Snape's involvement was complex. Harry had been turning the Snape problem over since the library confrontation, and his read was that Snape was not working with Voldemort, that what Snape was doing was a separate project entirely, one that ran along the same corridor but in the opposite direction. But the injury meant Fluffy had been passed, which meant the trapdoor had been opened, which meant either Snape had tried to get through or something had happened in that corridor that wasn't Snape making a move but was something responding to Snape getting close. "Tonight," Harry said. "Tonight," Hermione said, without hesitation, which was how you knew she'd been ready for a while. Ron said, "Right," in the way that meant he was afraid and was going anyway, which was the correct definition of courage. They waited until 1 in the morning. Harry took the invisibility cloak from his trunk and looked at it in the dormitory dim, the silver-gray shimmer of it, old magic running cool and deep. He folded it carefully under his arm. The wand was in his jacket pocket. The warmth in his chest was steady, a pilot light in a wind, neither nervous nor cold. He paused at the dormitory door and looked at his 3 dormitory mates, all of them asleep in the ordinary sprawled way of 11-year-olds who didn't know the night was doing something without them. He thought briefly about what that felt like, to not know. Found he couldn't fully reconstruct it. He went downstairs. Hermione was already in the common room with her bag, because of course she was. Ron came down 2 minutes after Harry, still lacing his shoes, his hair doing something complicated in the back. Harry settled the cloak over all 3 of them. It was a squeeze, which made the operation logistically imprecise, but it was manageable if nobody moved dramatically. "No sudden movements," Harry said. "Define sudden," Ron said. "Relative to normal movement," Hermione said. "Very helpful, thank you." They moved through the castle in the particular held breath quiet of 3 people trying to occupy less space than they actually did. The staircases obliged Harry, shifting once, quietly, as if the castle was facilitating something it had decided to permit. The portraits they passed were asleep or pretending to be. The fat lady, when they passed her on the way out, turned away with deliberate courtesy. The 3rd floor corridor was empty and cold and the door to the restricted section was standing slightly ajar, which had not been true yesterday. Harry stopped outside it. Behind the door came the sound of something very large breathing slowly, in the way of something deeply asleep. Fluffy, Harry had established in October, was a dog. An extraordinary, 3-headed, magically bred dog the size of a small car, but fundamentally a dog, which meant its basic motivations were dog motivations. He'd brought something from the kitchens on his October visit for exactly this reason, and he did the same tonight, 3 large pieces of the roast from dinner, borrowed from the kitchen passage 2 hours ago, kept in Hermione's bag. He slipped through the door alone and dropped the meat quietly and watched all three heads orient to it with the profound focus of a creature that loves food more than it loves duty. By the time he'd reopened the door for Hermione and Ron, Fluffy was already engaged with dinner and paying them the attention of something that had temporarily reorganized its priorities. The trapdoor was in the floor where Harry had felt it in October. He lifted the ring, looked down into the dark, and dropped. The fall was longer than expected. Harry landed in something soft and grabbed, then immediately let go, because the soft thing was grabbing back. Devil's Snare, he recognized. A magical plant that responded to struggle with tightening. The solution in theory was relaxation and light, which was elegant but slow, and Harry did not apply theory. He applied warmth, a gentle, diffuse spread of heat from his hands outward, not fire, just temperature, the way you'd warm a room rather than light a candle. The snare reacted to warmth the way it reacted to light, it let go immediately, recoiling, and Harry dropped through to solid ground. Hermione came through the trapdoor and hit the snare and went still immediately. She'd read about this, her body had the memory of theory before panic could override it. Harry warmed the air around her and the snare released her in seconds. Ron's landing was less elegant. He hit the snare grabbed, Ron said something that wasn't a word, and then the warmth spread through and he dropped to the ground beside Harry with the particular expression of someone who has just made friends with a large dangerous plant and didn't enjoy the process. "Everyone good?" Harry asked. "Great," Ron said, brushing vines off his shoulder. "What's next?" Ahead of them a door opened into a room filled with the sound of wings. The Winged Keys room was beautiful in the way things could be beautiful when they were also trying to hurt you, hundreds of old-fashioned keys drifting through the air, catching the magical light in their wings, and on the far wall a locked door whose keyhole was large enough to narrow the field but not to identify the specific key at a glance. 3 broomsticks on the ground. Harry looked at the keys for 5 seconds. He felt the wing patterns, the trajectories, the way the room had a circulation to it like weather. He was looking for the specific disruption of something that had been caught before, a key with a bent wing, the guides had said, Flitwick's notes in the margins of the text Hermione had found. There. Upper left quadrant, drifting in a slight wobble, one wing bent from a previous catching. He picked up a broomstick, mounted, went up. The keys scattered when he moved but the bent wing key's wobble made it slower than the others and less capable of the hard direction changes that made catching difficult. Harry tracked it in a half-circle, cut across its path, and had it in 4 seconds. The door opened. "That was," Ron started. "Chess," Harry said, landing. "You're up." The chess room was enormous and cold in a different way, stone pieces the height of a grown man, arranged in perfect starting positions, the board itself white and black marble extending 30 feet to a door on the far side. The pieces were motionless but there was a quality to them, a held readiness, that was alive. Ron stepped onto the board and looked at it for a long time without speaking. Harry and Hermione stayed at the edge. Harry watched Ron's face, watched the thing that happened to Ron when he was doing the one thing he was unambiguously extraordinary at, the particular settling of his whole attention into clean, focused calm. "White always goes first," Ron said, quietly. "We play black." He looked at the pieces. "Harry, you're a bishop. Hermione, you're a castle. I'll be the knight." "Ron," Hermione started. "I know what I'm doing," Ron said, without heat or arrogance. "Just certainty. Stay on your squares until I move you. The pieces know what they're doing, let them. Only move when I tell you." Harry took his square. The white pieces began to move. What followed was 12 minutes of the most focused, pressurized thing Harry had ever watched a person do. Ron played with the absorbed stillness of someone for whom chess had stopped being a game and become a language, calling moves quietly, watching the board 3 positions ahead, his voice never rising even when the white pieces took black pieces off the board with a sound like breaking stone. Harry moved when told. He trusted this completely, which was not always something he did with being directed, but Ron in this context was operating at a level Harry wasn't. Harry's intelligence was broad and adaptive, Ron's was specifically and transcendently here, and recognizing the difference was not a concession but accurate assessment. Hermione was taken in the ninth move. She stepped off the board at Ron's direction to a safe square at the edge, her face controlled. The game came down to the final sequence with 3 pieces left on each side, and Harry understood what was happening before Ron said it. The only path to checkmate from here required the Black Knight, Ron, to move into a square where it could be taken by the White Queen. Ron looked at the board. Harry looked at Ron. "You don't have to," Harry said. "Yes I do," Ron said, simply. He looked at Harry with the clear eyes of someone who has done the calculation and is at peace with the answer. "When you get to the mirror, don't try to think it out. Whatever it shows you, you'll know what to do." He moved the knight. "Check," he said, to the board. The White Queen moved across the board with the force of a battering ram and Ron went down hard, sliding off his square, and lay still with his eyes open and a slight dazed expression that meant he was conscious but considerably shaken. Harry was already moving. The White King toppled. The remaining white pieces went still. He looked at Ron. "You're okay." "See stars," Ron said, from the floor. "Few minutes. Go." "Hermione stays with you," Harry said. "Harry," Hermione started. "He needs someone and what's coming next is mine," Harry said, not coldly but absolutely. He looked at her. "You know I'm right." She did know. She pressed her lips together and looked at Ron on the floor and then at Harry. "Come back," she said. "Obviously," Harry said. The door on the far side of the board opened to a short corridor and a door to a room that smelled cold and stone, and the troll that Quirrell had placed here was already unconscious, had been since they'd entered the building, Harry guessed, already dispatched by whoever had come through before them. He passed it without stopping. The potion room was Snape's work, 6 bottles on a table, a roll of parchment, and fire blocking both the entrance and the far exit, purple in front and black behind. The parchment was a logic puzzle, elegant and clean in the way Snape's mind was elegant, a 7-line poem with enough internal logic to identify the correct bottle from position and content. Harry read it once. The smallest bottle, second from the right. He picked it up. Not ice cold, cooler than room temperature, which was the forward passage bottle per the parchment's logic. He drank it without drama, it tasted of nettle, and the black fire on the far side parted for him. He walked through. The mirror of Ariste was standing in the center of the last chamber, just as he'd found it in January, just as it had been when Dumbledore had moved the stone here, recently, within the last week, Harry guessed from the way the room's magical temperature had changed since he'd last checked its ambient reading. The chamber was bare stone, cold torchlight, no other furniture. And Quirrell, standing in front of the mirror with his back to Harry, hands clasped, very still. "I wondered when you'd arrive," Quirrell said, without turning. His voice was different here. Not performing the stammer, not performing the nervousness. Just the voice of someone who had decided to stop performing because the audience had already seen through it. Harry came through the door and let it close behind him and stood in the room's center. "Did you get past everything?" he asked. "The fire." Quirrell turned. His face was different too, the habitual anxiety gone, replaced with the composed intelligence of the actual person underneath it, which was considerably more interesting to look at than the performance had been. "The stone is in the mirror. Dumbledore's final protection is clever. A person who wants to use the stone can only see themselves using it. A person who only wants to find it, with no intent to use it," he looked at the mirror with genuine frustration. "Can't get it out. So you're stuck," Harry said. "We were waiting for you," said the second voice. It came from behind Quirrell, from the back of his head, from the turban, and the quality of it had changed since the library. The library voice had been measured, exploratory, almost conversational. This voice was older and colder and had shed some of its patience, and it carried in it the specific weight of something that had been waiting for a very long time and was done. Quirrell reached up and began unwinding the turban. Harry watched this without moving. The room's temperature dropped as the turban came off, steady and measurable, and then Quirrell turned around and what was on the back of his head was, not what Harry had expected. Not a face. More a suggestion of one, chalk-white, flat, red eyes, the face of something that had existed for so long in fragments that it had begun to forget the whole. Harry Potter, Voldemort said, from the back of Quirrell's head. Voldemort, Harry said. You'll use my name. I appreciate that. Most don't. I'm not afraid of names, Harry said. Voldemort's red eyes moved across Harry with the complete, consuming attention of a mind that had spent 10 months building a model and was now reconciling it with the reality. No, he said. You're not afraid of much, are you? Not much, Harry agreed. The mirror, Voldemort said. You can get the stone. You have no desire to use it, it's transparent in you. Dumbledore built this protection around a person who wanted to use it. You don't want it. Which means if you look into the mirror, the stone will appear to me, Harry said. Yes. The red eyes were very focused. And then you'll give it to me. Why would I do that? Harry asked. Because I'll offer you something worth having, Voldemort said. I know what motivates people. I have always known it. A pause, and the voice shifted quality, lower, more considered, stripped of rhetorical pressure. Your parents. Lily and James Potter. I can tell you what they were. I am one of 2 people alive who knew them both well, and one of those people has been carefully controlling what you know about them for 11 years. Another pause. Don't you want to know them? Without the curation. Without Dumbledore deciding what you're ready for. It was a good offer. Harry acknowledged this. It was the kind of offer that would have been devastating to the Harry Voldemort had modeled, the isolated child, the famous orphan, hungry for the family he'd lost. I know my parents died protecting me, Harry said. That's the part that matters. The rest is detail. The rest is people, Voldemort said. They were specific people. They had flaws and qualities and a history that extended before your birth and I have a family, Harry said. I have had one for 11 years. The specific details of James and Lily Potter matter to me and I intend to learn them, and I'll learn them from someone who knew them and isn't trying to use them as leverage. He looked at Quirrell's face, at the eyes on the back of the head, and let his voice be honest rather than hard. I'm not the person you built a strategy around. I know you've understood this since October. I think part of you has been genuinely curious about what I am, separate from the plan. That curiosity was the only part of our conversations that felt real. A silence. Fascinating, Voldemort said, and it was the word he used when something surprised him, and meant it. You're right. I have been curious. The red eyes studied Harry with something that was not warmth but was its structural equivalent in a being that had hollowed out most of its human qualities through decades of specific choices. What are you, exactly? Not a name. What are you? I'm what happens when ancient magic grows up alongside extraordinary people, Harry said. I don't have a better answer than that. And you won't give me the stone. No. Then we do this the other way, Voldemort said, and Quirrell moved. The speed was impressive. Quirrell was not a physical fighter but Voldemort was controlling the timing, and the first hex came fast and silent, no incantation, a jet of violet light that Harry's shield expanded to meet before he'd consciously decided on it. The rebound sent Quirrell staggering back, and Harry was already moving, not retreating, forward, which was not what Quirrell had anticipated. He took Quirrell's wand hand by the wrist. What happened then was something neither of them had a framework for in advance. Harry had been running warm since September with the castle's ambient magic in him, and the fire that ran through his contact with Quirrell was not violent but it was overwhelming, a full-body thermal wash that was, at root, the same protection that had saved his life as an infant. Not a weapon. A condition. His mother's sacrificial magic was in his blood and bone and it had been there for 11 years and it had spent 11 years in proximity to extraordinary people and growing into something vast, and when it made contact with the presence that had killed Lily Potter it reacted the way it had always reacted, which was, "This cannot stay." Quirrell screamed. It was not a hurt scream, or not only that. It was the specific cry of something in the wrong place being returned to the correct place, which was away. Voldemort's voice tore through the room, "Quirinus, release," but Quirrell couldn't release because Harry wasn't holding him, Harry was just touching him, and the warmth was doing the work, and what Harry was feeling in his chest was not rage or effort but something far older and quieter, which was, this was always going to happen this way. Quirrell's form began to come apart. Not violently, not explosively. It dissolved at the edges, like something that had been held together by an external force and the external force was leaving. The hands under Harry's grip lost their substance. The room temperature spiked, dropped, spiked again, and the mirror at the center of the room blazed once with a light that was not reflection, the stone working, briefly, at full capacity, in the presence of its own defeat. Voldemort left Quirrell's body with a sound that Harry felt rather than heard, a pressure wave, a scream at a frequency below sound, and then a presence in the room that was briefly, fully, everything Voldemort was, old, cold, enormous in its determination, scaled down and furious and stripped of its instrument. And it looked at Harry. Harry looked back. "You know I'll come back," Voldemort said. He had no voice now, just intent, just the pure transmission of a will that had refused to die through means that shouldn't have been possible. "I'll always come back." "I know," Harry said. "I'll be here." "You should be afraid," Voldemort said. "You are a child." "I'm what I am," Harry said. "And what I am ended your physical existence twice before I turned 1 year old and tonight with no particular effort. So." He let the warmth settle in his chest, steady and clear. "I'll be here when you come back." The presence moved, fled was too strong a word, but it moved away with the urgency of something that had found the situation worse than the planning had accounted for. Through the ceiling, through the castle, and then gone, and the room temperature climbed back to normal, and Quirrell was on the floor, and Harry was standing in the middle of the chamber with both hands at his sides and the mirror behind him and the stone doing something inside his pocket. He looked at his right hand. The stone had appeared there when Quirrell dissolved, had materialized in his palm the way the text said it would, for someone who wanted only to possess it and not use it. Smooth, red, warm against his fingers. He closed his fist around it. Then the world tilted. Not dramatically. Not like the movies. Just a slow gray quality moving in from the edges of his vision, and the realization that the contact burning had not been cost-free, that the amount of magic he processed in the last 90 seconds was enormous and his body was 11 years old and had been doing extraordinary things since 2 in the morning. He sat down on the floor next to Quirrell's still, breathing form, still breathing, Harry confirmed with a clinical glance, which mattered, Quirrell was a victim here alongside everything else he was, and he pressed his back against the mirror's base and looked at the ceiling. His magic was still going. It was fine. Everything was fine. The warmth in his chest was steady. He closed his eyes. The last thing he did before unconsciousness took over was pull the stone from his pocket and wedge it between the mirror's base and the floor where it was out of reach but findable, because passing out with the stone in his pocket while lying next to an incapacitated person seemed like imprecise risk management. Then the gray came in and Harry Richards Grimm lay in the room beneath the 3rd floor of Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, with Quirrell breathing on his left and the mirror blazing softly above him and the Philosopher's Stone exactly where it needed to be, and rested. He woke up to Dumbledore. This was not where he expected to wake up. He expected the hospital wing. He was in the hospital wing, white ceiling, antiseptic smell, the particular weighted silence of a room full of careful magic. But Dumbledore was in the chair beside his bed, and the quality of the light through the windows was early morning, and Dumbledore was eating something from a paper bag with the equanimity of a man who had found the right seat and decided to wait. Harry looked at him. "Good morning," Dumbledore said. He held out the paper bag. "Sherbet lemon?" "No thank you," Harry said. "You have been unconscious for approximately 18 hours, Dumbledore said. Madame Pomfrey is satisfied with your recovery. She is, however, expressing what I would describe as passionate concern about the level of magical exertion visible in your diagnostic readings, which are unusual, even for you. How's Ron? Harry asked. Awake, recovered, currently being told by Madame Pomfrey that he is heroic and still must rest, Dumbledore said. Miss Granger has not left the wing since she arrived. A pause. They were quite desperate, when we found them. Miss Granger had already begun composing a tactical plan for extracting you herself. I believe Mr. Weasley was prepared to play the Queen's gambit on anyone who got in her way. Harry felt something warm and simple at that. They're good, he said. They are, Dumbledore agreed, and he said it with the genuine weight of someone who had watched a great many students and knew the real thing when he saw it. He set the paper bag on the bedside table and folded his hands in his lap, and his eyes over the half-moon spectacles were the remarkable eyes Harry had noticed at the sorting, old and bright and running many things simultaneously. Harry, he said. Dumbledore, Harry said. I owe you an explanation, Dumbledore said. Possibly several. All right, Harry said. Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. Not the quiet of avoidance, the quiet of someone deciding exactly where to start with something complex, which Harry recognized because he did it himself. You were not supposed to come to the Baxter Building, he said. There was a plan. A place I believed would protect you while keeping you accessible to the world you were going to be part of. The Dursleys, Harry said. The Dursleys, Dumbledore said, without inflection. Lily's sister and her family. It was, he stopped. The magical protection of Lily's sacrifice would have activated through her blood, through Petunia. I believed it was the safest placement. But the rift took me somewhere else instead, Harry said. Yes. Dumbledore looked at him. I spent several years believing the rift was accidental. The result of the curse's rebound energy creating an unstable pocket that deposited you, somewhere. It was only recently that I understood it was not accidental. He paused. The curse's rebound was powered by your mother's sacrificial magic. And sacrificial magic, at its deepest level, is intentional. It acts on the desire of the one who cast it. Harry was very still. Lily didn't just die to protect you from Voldemort, Dumbledore said, quietly. She died wanting everything for you. She died with every hope she'd ever had for your life fully present in that magic. And the magic, he paused. It hurt her. It found the place that gave you the best chance at what she wanted. The hospital wing was very quiet. Through the window, Scotland was doing its early morning gold thing. Harry thought about Reed on the lobby floor at 2 a.m. Ben's rocky finger being grabbed by 2 small hands. Sue in the kitchen saying, when you feel it come up. Johnny at the pool saying, that's my boy. The magic sent me to them, he said. I believe so, Dumbledore said. I believe Lily Potter, in the moment of her death, was the most powerful magic user who has ever lived for the duration of one specific spell, and she aimed it at the best possible future for her son. He looked at Harry over the spectacles. She aimed it very well. Harry looked at his hands. The burn residue from Quirrell was gone, healed overnight, Madame Pomfrey's work. His hands were ordinary. His hands were what they'd always been. The stone, he said. Recovered, Dumbledore said. Where you left it, between the mirror and the floor, which was, Harry, that was very sensible. I was about to pass out, Harry said. Seemed like appropriate placement. It was. Dumbledore looked at him steadily. It will be destroyed. Nicholas Flamel has agreed. Voldemort will not be able to use it. He'll find another way, Harry said. Yes. No hesitation. He will. He told me he'd come back. He will do that too, Dumbledore said. Harry, I built a strategy around a version of you that doesn't exist. A child I thought I knew, in a situation I thought I'd managed. You have exceeded every aspect of that strategy while essentially ignoring it entirely, and the outcome is better than I planned for." He was quiet for a moment. "I find that humbling. I am not often humbled." "Useful thing to find out," Harry said, "and it wasn't unkind." Dumbledore looked at him and something in the extraordinary eyes shifted, not surprise, more a recognition. "Yes," he said. "It is." He stood, gathering his robes. "Your family has been contacted. Reed Richards has apparently filed 17 formal requests for information through S.H.I.E.L.D. and 2 through channels I prefer not to think about. Susan Richards called the ministry directly, and I am told that the ministry's response was so inadequate that she subsequently called me, and that conversation was one of the more clarifying I've had in some time." Harry smiled. "Benjamin Grimm," Dumbledore said, "sent a letter that consisted of 2 sentences. The first was a question about your well-being. The second was a description of what he would do if the answer to the first question was unsatisfactory." He paused. "It was very specific." "That sounds like Ben," Harry said. "Johnny Storm," Dumbledore said, "set the ministry's Ollery on fire. Accidentally, I'm told." "That also sounds like Johnny," Harry said. Dumbledore reached the door of the hospital wing and paused. He didn't turn around. "Quirrell will recover," he said. "He was used as a tool by something much larger than him, and he made choices that allowed that to happen, and he will need to reckon with those choices. But he will have the chance to." A pause. "You made sure of that." "I wasn't trying to kill him," Harry said. "I know." Dumbledore opened the door. "That is the difference between you and what you faced last night. I think you've always known that." He turned then, just briefly, and looked at Harry with the full weight of what he was. "Your mother would be extraordinarily proud." The door closed. Harry lay back in the hospital bed and looked at the ceiling and breathed. His magic was steady and warm. His hands were still his hands. He thought about Lily Potter in the last second of her life, aiming her love at the Baxter building like an arrow, and the absolute precision of it, and what it meant to be the thing she'd given her whole life to launch into the world. "Thanks, Mom," he said, to the ceiling. The ceiling didn't answer. But the warmth in his chest did something, a small, deep pulse, like a thing recognizing its name. Hermione appeared around the privacy curtain 30 seconds later, clearly having decided that 18 hours was a medically appropriate waiting period and she had now fulfilled it. She sat down in the chair Dumbledore had vacated and looked at Harry, and her face was doing the thing it did when she was managing multiple emotions with varying success. "You're okay," she said. "I'm okay," Harry said. "Tell me everything," she said, pulling out her notebook. "Hermione. Everything. Start with the Devil's Snare." Ron appeared around the curtain behind her on his feet and walking with the slightly careful gait of someone whose ribs were reminding him of what chess pieces weighed. He sat on the end of Harry's bed. "Yeah," he said. "Everything." Harry looked at both of them. The notebook. The chess player's clear eyes. The morning light coming through the window. "Right," he said. He started talking. Chapter 6. What the world learns. The hospital wing had a particular quality in the mornings that Harry found he'd become fond of. The light came in from the east windows at a low angle and turned everything amber, and Madame Pomfrey moved through it with the brisk, dedicated efficiency of someone whose entire purpose was making people better, which Harry respected enormously. She had, by his third morning, stopped pretending she wasn't fascinated by his diagnostic readings. The first time she'd run the standard magical assessment she'd said nothing, but he'd seen her look at the results, look at him, look at the results again, and then carefully set them face down on her desk in the manner of someone who needed a moment. By the second morning she'd asked, with careful professional neutrality, whether he'd be willing to let her run an expanded assessment. He'd said yes immediately, because he was genuinely curious too. The expanded assessment took 40 minutes and Madame Pomfrey spent most of it saying nothing, which in a woman whose default mode was firm reassurance said quite a lot. When she was done she sat down, folded her hands, and looked at him across the bed. "Your magical core," she said, "is unlike anything in my reference materials." "I know," Harry said. "It's not damaged," she said, and he understood from her tone that this was what she'd been checking for. "After what you expended in that chamber, the recovery rate is, I'd expect 3 weeks minimum for any wizard I've treated. You're looking at 3 days." She paused. "Possibly 2. Reed will want those numbers," Harry said. "Your father is welcome to contact me directly," Madame Pomfrey said, with the careful dignity of someone who had decided that the Fantastic Four were a thing she was going to deal with professionally. "Several members of your family have been in contact with the school." "I heard about Sue and the ministry," Harry said. Something that was almost a smile crossed her face. "Mrs. Richard Storm was very clear about her expectations," she said. "As was Mr. Grimm." She stood and straightened her apron. "You can have visitors this afternoon. Family, if they choose to come." "They'll come," Harry said. They came at 2 o'clock. Harry heard them before he saw them, not because they were loud, though Johnny was, but because the castle did something when they walked through the entrance. A shift in the ambient magic, the building taking note of new presences the way it noted everything. Harry had been sitting up in bed reading when the warmth in his chest did a specific thing it only did when his family was close, and he set the book down. Sue came through the ward doors first, moving with the compressed energy of someone who had been managing herself for 3 days and was nearly done managing. She reached his bed and sat on the edge of it, and her hands came to his face, both of them, cupping his jaw, and she looked at him with the concentrated attention of someone conducting the most important check they knew how to do. "Hi," Harry said. "Hi," she said, and her voice was completely steady, and her eyes weren't. "I'm okay," he said. "I know." She didn't let go. "I know you are. She pressed her forehead briefly to his. "I needed to see." He let her see. He understood what it cost her, the particular helplessness of a protector who protects at the molecular level being somewhere else when her person was in danger. He understood it because she'd explained it to him once, years ago, at the kitchen table, the way her force fields were tied to her emotional state, the way every person she loved existed somewhere in the architecture of her power as a thing to be shielded. He was in there. Had been since the lobby floor. She sat back. She was fine. "You look good," she said. "Madame Pomfrey says 2 more days probably," he said. "I've spoken with Madame Pomfrey," Sue said, in the tone that meant she'd asked approximately everything. Reed was behind her, notebook already in hand and the scanner clipped to his belt, running in passive mode because Reed Richards did not turn the scanner off within 30 feet of Harry even in hospital settings. He sat in the chair beside the bed and looked at Harry with the particular look he had, the one that started as assessment and became something else in the first half-second, something he'd never quite developed professional vocabulary for and therefore demonstrated instead. "The magical exertion readings in your last letter," Reed said. "I know," Harry said. "They were elevated significantly above any previous baseline." "I know. I'd like to do a comparative analysis with what Madame Pomfrey collected this morning, if she's willing." "She said to contact her directly," Harry said. Reed wrote something in the notebook. "The stone," he said. "The interaction between the protection in your bloodline and Voldemort's presence, the burning, I want to understand the mechanism." "I can tell you what it felt like," Harry said. "Whether that gives you mechanism I don't know." "Tell me what it felt like," Reed said. "Like the warmth in my chest found something it recognized as wrong and moved toward it instead of away," Harry said. "Not aggressive. More like, immune response. The magic knew what it was dealing with." Reed was writing fast. "The sacrificial protection from your mother." "Yes. But bigger than just that, I think. 11 years of," Harry paused. 11 years of being loved, Reed. That's what was in it. That's what it ran on." Reed stopped writing. He looked at Harry over the notebook. Then he closed the notebook, fully closed it, which he almost never did mid-conversation, and said, quietly and without any scientific qualification, "Yes. I imagine it was." Johnny was perched on the end of the bed with his legs crossed and his energy doing its restless but trying to be still thing, and he'd been quiet since he'd come in, which was a significant enough deviation from his baseline that Harry had been peripherally tracking it. Johnny quiet meant Johnny was feeling something big and hadn't found the right container for it yet. "You can say it," Harry said. Johnny looked up. "Say what?" "Whatever it is." A pause. Johnny uncrossed his legs and put his elbows on his knees and looked at Harry with the full weight of a person who was 23 years old and had held this kid at 2 days old and had been the one who said, in the lobby of the Baxter building 11 years ago, "We're keeping him, right?" "I keep thinking about the pool," Johnny said. "When you were 8. Those kids who grabbed you." He paused. "I was supposed to be watching you." "You were 23, Harry said. "You were watching." "I didn't see it start." "I handled it," Harry said. "Yeah." Johnny looked at his hands. "That's the thing. You always handle it. You've been handling it since you could do the thing with the toys across the room. And I think somewhere I started to just trust that you'd handle it." He looked up. "That's not the same as watching." "Johnny," Harry said. "I should have been there," Johnny said. "In that room." "I should have been." "No," Harry said. "You shouldn't." He looked at his brother, because that was what Johnny was, had always been, would always be, and he let the honesty of it be simple. "If you'd been in that room the ending changes. Not because you're not extraordinary. Because the thing I faced was specifically about me and the magic I carry, and it needed to be me, and you being there would have given Voldemort leverage over me that he didn't have." He paused. "You protect me best by being in the world for me to come back to. That's not a small thing." Johnny was quiet for a moment. Then, "That's a very mature thing to say." "Reed raised me," Harry said. A sound from Reed that was not quite a laugh. "I'm allowed to be annoyed about it," Johnny said. "Completely," Harry said. "Be annoyed. Just don't." He looked at him. "Don't make it mean you did something wrong. You didn't." Johnny looked at him for another moment. Then he reached over and grabbed Harry by the back of the neck in the specific way he'd done since Harry was small, not a headlock, just a grip, warm and complete and present. "You're the best kid I never knew I wanted," he said, which was as close to a full declaration as Johnny Storm generally got, and meant everything. Harry grabbed his arm and held it there briefly. "Obviously," he said. Ben had been standing at the foot of the bed this whole time. He'd come through the ward doors with everyone else and he'd gone to the foot of the bed and stayed there, and Harry had been aware of him the whole time with the particular awareness he had of Ben, the specific frequency of him, the deep steady presence that had always felt like ground beneath Harry's feet. Ben was looking at him now with the expression he had at important moments, the one that didn't pretend to be anything other than what it was. Harry held out his hand. Ben crossed to him in 2 steps and took it, one enormous orange rock hand around Harry's, precisely gentle, and sat in the chair Sue had moved to beside the bed. He didn't say anything. He just held Harry's hand and looked at him with everything right there in his face, and Harry looked back with the same openness, and the hospital wing was quiet around them for a moment. "I know," Harry said. "Yeah," Ben said. "You do." "I'm okay." "I know that too." A pause. "Doesn't make it smaller." "No," Harry agreed. "It doesn't." Ben's hand tightened briefly. "You said you'd call." "I didn't have time to call," Harry said. "It moved faster at the end than I expected." Next time I'll call," Harry said. "I mean it." "You better," Ben said, which was what he always said and meant, "I believe you but I need to hear it again." Dumbledore appeared at the ward door at 3 o'clock with the impeccable timing of someone who had been allowing a family their reunion and had watched it reach its natural conclusion. He knocked on the door frame, which Harry appreciated. I wonder, he said, with the careful diplomacy of a man navigating waters he respected, whether I might speak with Harry and his family. Together, if that's agreeable. Reed looked at Harry. Harry nodded. Dumbledore settled in the chair at the bed's end and looked at the assembled Richard's grim family with the attention of someone encountering a phenomenon they'd been hearing about and were now examining directly. Sue and Johnny sat on one side of the bed. Ben occupied the chair beside Harry. Reed stood with his arms folded in the way he had when he was in thinking mode and also didn't want to sit down. "I'll be direct," Dumbledore said, which Harry appreciated because he'd expected preamble. "This year has not unfolded as I planned. The outcome is better than I planned for, and the reasons for that are almost entirely sitting in this room." He looked at Harry. "Harry has already heard some of this. You should all hear it." He told them. The whole thing, the plan for the Dursleys, the sacrificial protection, the theory of the blood magic, the rift. What had actually happened. What he'd eventually understood about it. His voice was steady and precise and completely without the rhetorical management Harry had noticed in his letters. When he was done, the room was quiet in the specific way that meant several very capable people were processing and none of them had finished yet. Sue spoke first. "You were going to put him with people who didn't want him." "I believed the protection required it," Dumbledore said. "I was working from an incomplete understanding of how the protection functioned." "You were going to put a child with people who didn't want him," Sue said, and her voice was the voice she used when she was certain and not shouting, which was considerably more terrifying than shouting. "Yes," Dumbledore said, and there was something in the way he said it, no deflection, no additional context, that told Harry the old man had been sitting with this particular reckoning for a while and had decided it deserved a clean acknowledgement. "I was wrong. The magic understood what I did not, that a protection built from love required love to sustain it. What sent Harry to you understood that better than I did." A pause. Reed unfolded his arms. "The Dursley family," he said. "The specific family you'd chosen." "The Dursleys," Dumbledore said. "I ran a background inquiry through S.H.I.E.L.D. in 1984, Reed said. When I was attempting to trace Harry's origin. The Dursleys were on the list of potential magical adjacent contacts in Britain." He paused. "I pulled their full profile. I have never showed that profile to Harry." Harry looked at Reed. "Why not?" "Because the information would have caused you pain with no countervailing benefit," Reed said. "You were settled and loved, and the profile would have told you about a life you didn't live, which would have been cruel." He looked at Dumbledore. "The Dursleys would not have been adequate." "No," Dumbledore said, quietly. "They would not." "Right," Ben said, and his voice had the deep, specific quality it got when he was keeping something very controlled. "So we're agreed. The magic got it right and the plan got it wrong." "Yes," Dumbledore said. "Good," Ben said. "Then we don't need to keep talking about what almost happened." Dumbledore looked at Ben for a moment. "No," he said. "We don't." Something in his expression, the complicated, old thing under the professional warmth, acknowledged something in Ben without words, and Harry watched it happen and filed it as one of the more significant things he'd seen this year. "What happens next year," Dumbledore said, "is going to be more difficult than this year. Voldemort is weakened but not defeated. He will find a way back to a body. He has allies still active in the wizarding world, and there are situations developing that I'm not yet able to fully characterize." He looked at Harry. "I would like to discuss those situations with you. Not in a way that removes your choices from you. In a way that makes sure you have complete information." "Yes," Harry said immediately. "You're 11, Sue said. "Almost 12, Harry said. "Harry. Sue." He looked at her with the directness they'd always used with each other, because she'd always responded to honesty better than management. "Voldemort knew my name before I could talk. Whatever is coming has had my name on it since before I was born. I can either know about it or not know about it. Which is safer?" She looked at him. She looked at Dumbledore. She looked at Reed, who said nothing but whose posture communicated his position clearly. She looked at Ben, who was watching Harry with the uncomplicated pride of someone watching a person they raised demonstrate exactly who they are. Complete information, she said, to Dumbledore. Not strategic omissions dressed up as protection. Complete. I understand, Dumbledore said. He'll tell us, Sue said. Everything you tell him, he'll tell us. I would expect nothing less, Dumbledore said, and the tone was not resignation but something closer to relief, which Harry found interesting and filed away. Dumbledore left at 4. Harry's family stayed through dinner, which Madame Pomfrey facilitated with the brisk graciousness of someone who had decided that the Fantastic Four were going to be present in her ward and she might as well make it smooth. Ben ate 3 times what anyone else ate and Madame Pomfrey said nothing, which was her highest form of accommodation. It was the best dinner Harry had had in months, which was saying something because Hogwarts fed people well. He sat in the hospital bed with his tray and his family around him and the low gold of the late afternoon moving through the east windows, and he was completely, unhurriedly present. The end-of-year feast happened 3 days later, when Madame Pomfrey signed Harry's release with the specific satisfaction of a medical professional who has successfully returned something to working order. He walked into the great hall on his own feet and slid into his seat at the Gryffindor table between Ron and Hermione, who both looked at him the way people looked at things they'd been worried about returning. You look fine, Ron said. I'm fine, Harry said. You don't look like someone who faced Voldemort, Ron said. What does that look like? Harry asked. Ron considered. More pale, I think. More shaky. Noted, Harry said. I'll work on looking more appropriately traumatized. Please don't, Hermione said. The hall was full and loud and the enchanted ceiling was doing its thing and the house tables were gleaming and Hogwarts was doing what Hogwarts did at feasts, being the specific, extraordinary place it was, centuries of tradition and magic and young people at the beginning of things. Harry looked at it all with the warm, attentive affection of someone who has found a new place to love. At the teacher's table, the space where Quirrell had sat was empty. McGonagall had told Harry yesterday, in the brief and precise way she delivered significant information, that Quirrell had been transferred to St. Mungo's for observation and would be evaluated by the Ministry before any further decisions were made. Her tone had been careful in the way that meant she was navigating her professional assessment of Quirrell's culpability against her awareness that what had been inside him was not Quirrell's choice. Harry had said, he needs time more than he needs judgment. McGonagall had looked at him over her spectacles and said nothing, which was her way of agreeing. Snape was at the table, controlled and dark and specifically not looking at Harry, which was the specific not looking Harry had come to understand as a different kind of attention rather than absence of it. Harry looked at Snape once, directly, and gave him one small nod, which was as much as he had to give and more than Snape had any reason to expect. Snape looked away. But something in his posture, the finest adjustment, invisible to anyone not paying Harry's kind of attention, acknowledged it. Dumbledore stood for announcements. The feast settled. The House Cup, he said, had been awarded, Slytherin in the lead, a position that produced the specific silence of everyone who had predicted this and a rumble from the Slytherin table. Then Dumbledore looked out over the hall with those remarkable eyes and said he had last-minute points to award. 50 points to Hermione Granger, for the application of logic and preparation under extreme conditions. The Gryffindor table responded enthusiastically. Hermione went very still in the way she went still when something important happened and she needed a moment with it. Harry bumped his shoulder against hers once and she bumped back. 50 points to Ron Weasley, for the finest display of chess Dumbledore had witnessed in 40 years at this school and for the specific courage of a sacrifice made without hesitation. Ron went red from the collar up. Fred and George, from further down the table, produced noise that probably carried to Edinburgh. Ron looked at his plate and was absolutely unable to keep the grin off his face, which was the best version of Ron's face Harry had ever seen. And then Dumbledore looked at the Gryffindor table directly, with the attention of someone delivering the last and most considered thing on his list. 60 points, he said, to Harry Richards Grim. For doing what needed to be done in the way it needed to be done, with more grace and less damage than anyone had a right to expect. A pause, and his voice took on the quality it had in Harry's hospital room, stripped of performance, just the actual thing. And for being precisely himself, when it would have been considerably easier not to be. The great hall went up. Not just Gryffindor, across all 4 tables, even Slytherin had a sound, uncertain but present, the particular noise of people being moved by something they hadn't expected to be moved by. Harry was aware of it in the general, observational way he was aware of large things, but what he was more aware of was Ron cheering beside him and Hermione's hand briefly grabbing his arm and the warmth in his chest doing its pilot-like thing. The house standings shifted. Gryffindor took the cup. Dumbledore sat down and caught Harry's eye across the hall and gave him the half-moon spectacles look, and Harry met it with the same openness he gave everything, and Dumbledore inclined his head once. Harry inclined his back. At the Slytherin table, Draco Malfoy was not cheering. He was sitting with his usual crowd, his face controlled in the way it was controlled when he was doing internal work, and he was looking at his plate. Harry watched him for a moment. Then Malfoy looked up, found Harry's eyes across the hall with the precision of someone who had been tracking a position on a map, and held his gaze. His expression was the most honest Harry had ever seen it. Not the aristocratic assessment, not the careful neutrality. Just a person looking at another person and arriving at a decision. He gave Harry a single nod. Short, direct, deliberate. Harry nodded back. Then Malfoy turned to his tablemates and the conversation resumed, and the feast happened around them, and Harry reached for the roast potatoes because he was extremely hungry and had been eating hospital food for 3 days. The train back to London ran through a Scotland that had decided June meant something and was finally delivering on it, long light, green hills, the sky a specific northern blue that Harry thought he might miss. He sat in the compartment with Ron and Hermione and the mood was the particular end of something mood that was also the beginning of something, which was the best kind. Ron had eaten 4 sandwiches from the trolley and was currently working on a chocolate frog card with the focused energy of a collector. Hermione had a book open but kept not reading it, which for Hermione meant she was thinking something through. Next year, she said, to the window. Yes, Harry said. It's going to be different, she said. What happened this year, once it becomes known, and it will become known, changes things. It was always going to change things, Harry said. I changed things the moment I got on this train. Harry, Hermione said, in the tone of someone who has something to say and is organizing it. You understand that you're going to be more visible next year. More attended to. The ministry, the families, the whole world that was waiting to see what the boy who lived was, and now they know, Harry said. They know something, Hermione said. They don't know everything. Does that worry you? Harry asked. She thought about it genuinely. No, she said. What worries me is the people who'll try to explain you using the categories they have. You don't fit the categories. Good, Harry said. Harry, Hermione. He looked at her. I spent 11 years being raised by people who the world kept trying to put in categories too. The Thing. The Human Torch. Mr. Fantastic. Mrs. Invisible Woman. He paused. None of them fit their categories either. That's not a problem. That's freedom. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she did the thing she did when she'd received something important, she turned it over, examined it, and filed it properly. Freedom, she said. You get to be more than the category, Harry said. That's the whole thing. That's the point. Ron looked up from his chocolate frog card. The point of what? Being yourself, Harry said. Oh, Ron said. Right. Yeah. He looked at his card. I got Agrippa. Finally. Congratulations, Hermione said. You don't know why that's good. I know it took you 8 months, Hermione said. That seems sufficient. Ron pointed at her. You've been paying attention. I pay attention to everything, Hermione said. The train ran south through the afternoon, and at King's Cross the platform was its ordinary chaos and Harry stepped through the barrier and the Muggle world received him with its total, beautiful indifference, and 4 people were waiting on the other side. Reed had his notebook. Sue had her hands free and her arms already open. Johnny was leaning against a post with his sunglasses on and his hands in his pockets, being nonchalant in the specific way that meant he was doing the opposite of nonchalant. Ben was in the large coat that was his public appearance standard, hat and gloves, and was standing slightly apart from the crowd because crowds and Ben required negotiation. Harry stopped for just a second when he came through. He just looked at them. 1 second. The whole picture. Then he walked forward and Sue caught him and the hug was the right length and the right tightness and smelled like the Baxter Building in home, and Reed's hand on his shoulder was Reed's hand, and Johnny's greeting involved the arm around the neck and the noogie and the, there he is, at full volume, and Ben was last and best. And Harry pressed his face to Ben's chest in the lobby of King's Cross Station with hundreds of Muggle commuters entirely unmoved around them and Ben's arms came around him with the precise gentleness of 11 years and Harry felt complete. Every week, Ben said. Every week, Harry confirmed, into his coat. You're taller again, Ben said. Another ½ inch, Harry said. That's a full inch since September, Reed said, from behind them. I have that in the notebook, Reed said. I know you do, Harry said. They walked out of King's Cross into the London afternoon and the city was doing its indifferent brilliant thing, and somewhere above them an owl was turning, and somewhere in the world Voldemort was doing what he always did, waiting, planning, patient in the way of things that refused to finish dying. And Harry walked with his family through the city and thought about next year, which would be harder and stranger and would have its own shape that he couldn't fully see yet, and he thought about what he'd told Hermione on the train, and he thought about what Dumbledore had said in the hospital room, and he thought about a woman with red hair and green eyes aiming her last moment at the best possible future for her son. He thought about what it meant to be that future. Not the boy who lived. Not the symbol, not the legend, not the category built around a scar and a survival. Not a strategy or a prophecy or a piece on someone else's board. What it meant to be Harry. Just Harry. Harry who was 11 years old and going home for the summer and had a wand in his pocket and an invisible cloak against his ribs and magic in his blood that ran warm and broad and deep, old as anything and new as the particular shape he'd made it into. Harry who had friends and a castle that opened doors for him and a family that was the best aimed spell anyone had ever cast. He was what his mother had wanted him to be and what his family had made him and what he'd grown into in the space between those two things, and none of it had a name that fit, and that was fine. That was freedom. The city moved around them. They walked through it. The evening came in from the east with its orange and gold extravagance and the Baxter Building rose ahead of them above the Manhattan skyline, 30 floors of home. Reed held the door. Harry walked through. That night, after dinner and after Johnny had spent 45 minutes getting the complete account of the troll incident including burn trajectory and expression and had pronounced himself satisfied, after Reed had run 3 passive scans and made 17 pages of notes and then sat with Harry for an hour talking through the quarrel mechanism and the sacrificial magic in the way only Reed talked about things, as if the universe had left a puzzle here specifically for them, after Sue had sat with him in the kitchen with tea and talked about nothing consequential. After the day had done what it needed to do, Harry went to the roof. It was warm for June. The city was doing its permanent bright thing, that orange and gold wash that drowned out stars but made its own kind of sky. He sat on the edge with his legs hanging and his hands on the concrete beside him and felt the warm night and the hum of the city and the distant rivers. His magic was steady and quiet and complete. Ben came through the roof door and settled beside him in the particular way he settled, unhurried, massive, the specific comfort of something that has been the most reliable thing in your world for as long as you can remember. Hey, Harry said. Hey, Ben said. They sat for a while. The city moved below. A siren in the 30s. A helicopter going north. The river catching the light. I was thinking on the train, Harry said. Yeah. Ben said. About what's coming. Next year. All of it. He looked at the sky, the orange-washed not quite dark of it, the stars that were there if you knew where to look. Voldemort's going to come back. Something every year, Dumbledore said. Things developing that he can't fully see yet. He turned his hand over on the concrete. It's a long road. Yeah, Ben said. It is. I'm not afraid of it, Harry said. I know, Ben said. But it helps, Harry said, that you're here. Ben was quiet for a moment. The city went on below them, indifferent and brilliant and enormous. Kid, he said. Yeah. You know what you are. Ben said. I think so, Harry said. Not the power thing, Ben said. Not the magic and the fire and the force field thing. I mean, he paused, finding the word with the care he always used for important things. You're good. That's it. You're good in the way that matters. In the way that doesn't flinch. Harry didn't say anything. He looked at the sky and the warmth in his chest was there, steady and full. That comes from you, Ben said. Not from us. We maybe kept it safe. But it was always yours. You kept it very safe, Harry said quietly. Yeah, well. Ben's enormous shoulder shifted. We had a good thing to work with. Harry leaned against him. The warm night moved around them and the city glittered below and the stars were up there doing their patient work above the light pollution, and the year that was ending had been extraordinary and the year ahead was going to be harder and neither of those things was frightening. He thought, next year there will be something new. There always is. And I will go into it the way I go into everything, knowing what I am, carrying everyone I love in my chest, and refusing to be smaller than I am. He thought, I think next year's going to be more interesting. Hey Ben, he said. Yeah, kid. Next year's going to be more interesting, he said. Ben looked out at the city. Obviously, he said. Harry grinned. Below them, the Baxter Building hummed with the quiet life of extraordinary people at rest. Reed was in the lab writing 17-page notes on magical mechanics. Sue was reading with her force field generating the gentle shimmer it always had when she was relaxed. Johnny was watching television too loudly and would be asked to turn it down twice before midnight. The building held them all 30 floors of it, all the accumulated years of important things happening here, and it was full of the specific warmth of a home that knows what it is. Harry sat on the roof with Ben until the city had settled into its late-night register and the stars above the light were as visible as they were going to get, and then he stood, brushed off his jeans, and held out his hand. Ben took it and they went back inside.